Welcome, everyone, to the 2020 Asia Pacific Summit from PRovoke Media. Obviously, it's a shame that we can't do this in person, but I think this is the next best thing. We have a fantastic agenda for you this morning. To start things off, I just want to point out we are running this in conjunction with our event interactivity partner, SparkUp, which is a very cool interaction platform that we will be using for the first 3 sessions. You can use it to post questions and thoughts, but also we'll be asking for your views. We'll be asking you to take part in some activities so we can make this event as interactive as possible. A big thank you to Christopher Dometer, APAC-D Vice President, who is running SparkUp for us during these sessions. Right now, I'd like to ask all of you, please, you can already see this on your screen, but please on your mobile device, if you could please log in as per the details in front of you. So provoke.sparkup.live, and the code is NXAZB. Once you've logged in, to get things started, I'd like you all to do the first activity that is presented to you, and that is to please describe 2020 in one word. Christopher, if we can load that activity up. So this is a word cloud. Oh, and of course, no profanity, please. Although actually, I don't really mind. We are going to try to examine today how brands and agencies are responding to this year's communications challenges. And that will cover such issues as the recovery strategies for growth, creativity born out of the COVID crisis, the future of employee engagement, rising geopolitical tensions, and more. So from all of us at PRovoke Media, thank you for joining us. I need to also thank our partners at the Asia Pacific Association of Communication Directors. Sorry, I'm just looking at the words that are coming through. All of our sponsors, of course, I must thank. This event would not be possible without them. Their support has been invaluable this year more than ever. All of the speakers, I need to thank. We have a very compelling and diverse lineup. We have speakers from China, India, Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, Australia, Brussels, and London. We have an event team that is running this from New York, London, Berlin, Hong Kong, and Japan. So this is a truly global event. So while these words are coming through, I'm enjoying them. Challenge is getting a lot of support. Hell, I think that's allowed. Tiring, disaster, draining, tough. Yeah, these are unsurprising. While you're doing that, let's get the first session. We'll start getting ready for the first session, which is going to be about growth strategies for 2021. So it's titled From Fragility to Agility. So amid immense COVID-19 fatigue, we are going to try to understand how the communications industry will rebound in 2021. Before I come to the panelists, Christopher, I would just like to ask you if we could please switch to the pre-event survey. And what I'd like to do here, we asked many of you to do this survey before the event. And what I'd like you all to do, if you haven't done it, if I could please ask you to just take 20 seconds on your mobile devices to quickly answer the 6 questions here. And with that said, I would like to bring the panelists in, if that's possible, OJ?
Yep, coming up.
Excellent. Great. Okay, well, thanks to all the panelists for joining us this morning. OJ, if we could please show Elan and Meenu and unmute them as well, thank you. All right, so let me discuss our wonderful panel, introduced. So first of all, we have Elan Shou, who's the Executive Senior Vice President at Rudafin Asia. Elan, welcome.
Hello, everybody.
We have Meenu Handa, who's joining us from India. Sorry, Elan is in Shanghai, correct?
Yes, I'm in Shanghai.
Meenu's coming. Meenu, you're in Mumbai? Delhi. Senior Director of Corporate Communications for Google Payments and NBU. Welcome, Meenu.
Morning, everyone. Thank you.
And from the greatest city in the world, Hong Kong, Tori Cowley, Group Chief Communications Officer at Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing. Welcome, Tori.
Morning, everyone.
So while we're waiting for the survey results to come through, and we will show you the survey results shortly, Christopher, I don't know if we can switch back to the word cloud, but if not, I would just like to ask the panelists, from what we saw, the most common word we saw on the screen, challenging, tough, hell, disaster, draining, tiring. So Tori, let me start with you. Does any of that surprise you?
No, not really. Sadly, I think it's been a pretty tough year for everybody all around, isn't it? Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whether that's personal or professional, or probably both, it's almost hard to think of anybody who hasn't been impacted in some way by either COVID-19 or the sort of geopolitical backdrop that we're currently operating, or the economic challenges that we have. So sadly, fairly horrid year all around.
Yeah. Elan, I wonder from your perspective how you're seeing everything, because of course in Shanghai, things have reverted to some kind of normality, right? For a lot longer than the rest of the world.
Yes, I think things are getting back to norm, almost back to norm already in June, because we stopped the correlation from, I think, May, everybody kind of back to work. June, it's full work capacity. But what we also see is the market is coming back as well. You'll hear that in front of the luxury boutiques, people are queuing to buy, because the compressed needs to buy now exploded. And also the recent research we are also seeing that people are very keen to travel. Although they cannot travel internationally, they're very keen to go outside of Shanghai to other provinces. So we expect the next national holiday will be exploding. So a lot of challenges, a lot of changes, but we still see hope. So that goes back to the resilience.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to hear. And one thing I will say is, the research we have done and actually done globally and presented last week, it does seem like the industry has proven more resilient than perhaps many of us expected. Meenu, let me come to you next. What would be your word to describe 2020?
I think pretty much Tori and Elan have said everything that needed to be said. But what I would say is that usually it's from the churn that comes the butter. So this is really going to be that inflection point where many things will change. The way we work, the approach that we take to our profession and our businesses everywhere. So I would say it's an inflection point in some ways.
Good. Well, we're looking forward to more butter, I imagine. Christopher, if I could ask you now to switch so that we can see the survey results. And at that point, we can start discussing them. I think we'll have some quite interesting findings to go through. We asked questions around business growth in 2021. We asked questions about growth and positivity, about Marcom's investment priorities, about how communications is driving business growth, about the challenges people are facing, and about whether people in the industry think they will be increasing hiring and indeed be better funded in 2021. So the idea here with these questions is really to get a sense of how the recovery, touch wood, is going to play out. And I think the panelists can really speak to this because they're probably at different stages, depending on where they're from and depending on the kinds of businesses they work for. Christopher, could you show us the results for question 1, please? So do you feel more confident about your business growth in 2021? And it's an overwhelming yes there, which is great to see. So let me reverse the order this time. Meenu, let me start with you. Do you share that optimism about business growth in 2021 from your perspective?
Certainly, I think it'll be different, but yes, there will be a business growth. It's not going to be in the normal circumstances that we're used to or think of. But yes, definitely, I do see human beings and humanity is very resilient. We will find a way. So, yeah.
Okay. Good. Glad to hear it. Just quickly for a follow-up, are there any particular areas that you are optimistic about, just based in terms of the areas that you work in as well?
Look, I think it's there are certain areas which have gone down. Obviously, tourism, etc. Certain, it's a no-brainer. It's taken a hit. But I do believe there are, look at the way the sorry, I'm losing the word. But the businesses that have been operating in that environment have adapted. They've come up with new ways, So now you have different experiences being sold on the internet. So businesses evolve. There'll be very many new businesses that will come out of it. So it's difficult to predict today, but yes, I do believe there will be changes.
Okay, good. So adaptation brings opportunity.
Yes.
Elan, what are you optimistic about when it comes to business growth in 2021? I suspect you are perhaps further ahead of the curve, just by virtue of being based in Shanghai.
Yeah, based in Shanghai. I'll give you some facts why we are very confident, because we see budget cut started from Chinese New Year. So at that time, we're very nervous, and you see the whole industry, especially the PR industry in China and in Asia Pacific, freeze headcount and freeze salary and freeze all these kind of things in the middle of the year. And actually, we see a very strong rebound from June, July, and you begin to see the queues in the market, and you begin to see huge consumptions online from Tmall and from Jingdong, which all tell you how keen people are spending their money. So it's very interesting that even in the crisis time, that the healthcare industry remained very robust, and we see a huge budget increase in that category. Then starting from the second half of the year, we see a strong budget increase from luxury as well as auto industry. And FMCG begin to increase their budget as well. Sometimes the budget go back to the retail space. Sometimes it's more focused on the online space. So today, when I receive RFP, the most thing I need to ask our team is, do you still have capacity? So in this market, you start to see new hiring in agencies, and also you start to understand that they want to put money into the market for next year. That's a very solid reason for me to be confident, because I see the businesses coming back. Although the money might shift more from traditional PR to certain other areas, such as crisis management, such as CSR, such as online communications.
Okay, great. That's good to hear. We'll talk about the changes, perhaps. I'll come back to that. One thing I should just note, everyone on your SparkUps, that there is a question wall that you can access if you're looking at your SparkUp on mobile. I'll just show you very quickly. So if you're looking at SparkUp on mobile, there's a button down at the bottom which says "For You." And if you click that, you can access a question wall and you can submit your questions on there. We will be monitoring the questions in real time, and we will be asking panelists to answer them. So, Tori, over to you. Do you feel more confident about your business growth in 2021? 2020 wasn't terrible for your business growth.
Yeah, so this is a little uncomfortable for me, because whilst the world has been having a pretty horrible time, financial markets around the world has actually had quite a stellar year, and Hong Kong Stock Exchange has had a record year this year so far to date. Why is that? I think financial markets respond to macro stimuli, and even in difficult times, people need to fund growth. People need to think about how they get out of the trouble that they're in, how they hedge their positions, how they manage their treasury functions. So almost regardless of what industry you're in, whether that's FMCG, luxury, industrials, new economy, etc., the financial markets have been pretty buoyant. For us, I think 2021 looks like a very good year ahead. We're particularly interested in, and Elan mentioned it, areas such as biotechnology, pharma, life sciences, new economy we think is going to continue to boom. And in terms of Hong Kong and Asia as a region, we see great growth in non-equity products. So in financial markets, things like derivatives, ETFs, which are very a nascent industry in Asia. So there's lots of opportunities for us. And of course, for Hong Kong, which has been a bit bruised and battered in the last year or so, I think as it settles down, it continues to play a very unique role in connecting China with the rest of the world. And I think that's going to be present lots of opportunities too.
Good. Well, that's very encouraging to hear. Christopher, can we please show the results from the second question, please? So this kind of follows on from the first, but this is where specifically are all of you seeing growth positivity in your company in 2021? It's evenly split between adapting to a post-COVID-19 environment and new working style / practices. So Elan, I wanted to actually come to you first on this one. Now, from what you said, it almost sounded like it was business as usual in Shanghai and in China. But bearing in mind these results, and people are seeing growth from change, from companies adapting to a different environment, from a new style of working. What are the opportunities you see arising out of these changes?
Okay, there are several interesting opportunities. One thing we see obviously is internal communications. It's simply because now a lot of people are working from home, and working from home become a new norm. So when you separate your staff far from the office, how are you going to create a sense of belonging? That become a crucial topic. And how are you going to building linkage among the team members and create those peer pride? All this become a huge topic. So now HR as well as internal communication has become a major client for us. They are all asking us if there's something we could provide. So this is a very interesting topic. The second thing is always in the past, online and offline, we call it integrated communication, IMC. In a lot of cases, you have two batches of different customers. The people go to retail are literally the different kind. You have a different kind of people go to online shopping. They are two very different kinds of people. This COVID-19, one of the major tasks of those consumer products is to drive those offline clients to online. Mm-hmm. So in future, if there are similar situation, disaster happen again, when the pandemic comes, that they can rely on online sales independently. Okay, this is something we see very different. In the past, it's you have offline, you have online, and it's integrated. Now they're saying that whether if the pandemic comes, the online sales itself can be affordable. So these are two major changes we see. The third change is because of this world. I think we'll probably discuss it later. It's becoming more and more polarized, opinion against each other. You know, in the US, one opinion, Europe, another opinion, then in China, it's totally a different opinion. So how big companies, especially MNCs, going to survive in this environment, meanwhile keep a consistent identity? That's another question nowadays have been explored quite a lot with the corporate communication.
Okay, yeah, very interesting responses there. And in particular, I think the idea of a fully digital ecosystem is one that, you know, will force perhaps long overdue, you know, complete digital transformation in this industry and many others. Tori, let me come to you next. Looking at the results from the survey, you know, this kind of adapting to a post-COVID-19 environment and growth from new working style and practices, would you agree with those as responses to this question?
I think I would. I mean, they're quite broad areas. In terms of adapting to a post-COVID-19 environment, one of the really interesting cataclysmic things that I think is going to come out, hopefully positively, out of what has happened is this pursuit of sustainability, and idea of whether that's green finance or good governance or good business practice. And I think that that will have massive implications for companies all around the world, and as communicators and people who look after brand and reputation and the purpose of an organization. I think that adaptation to a post-COVID environment is going to be one of the, I hope, one of the positive things that comes out of this terrible year. Only yesterday, China announced that they were planning to be carbon neutral by 2060, which was a major, major piece of news. And I think that that will reverberate throughout Asia and sets the bar for the world's largest carbon emitter. So that's very exciting. And in terms of new working styles and new working practices, I think Elan mentioned it earlier, as did Meenu, this idea of flexibility, adaptability, whether that's using technology to engage with your workforce, this idea that organizations all need to be in one office, in one place, and everyone needs a desk, which I think much of non-new economy companies have struggled with, have finally actually been given the kicker up the backside as a result of COVID. And people are accepting now that, you know, people can work from home, can work flexibly and still complete their job. So I think for communicators and for business as a whole, there will be some major changes in the way people are engaging with their staff, the way they structure their businesses, where they're located, how they operate. And I think sustainability will run through almost everything that people do, and I'm hopeful of that as well.
Okay, so yeah, that I think will hopefully bring real opportunity for this industry too. So Meenu, I'm going to move on to the next question and actually pose that one to you, because they're quite similar, I feel, to 1, 2, and 3. So what are the 3 marketing and communications investment priorities for 2021? We asked attendees to select 3, and I can't imagine this will surprise too many people. At the top is corporate reputation, followed, I think more or less it's a tie for second place between crisis management and employee engagement. So Meenu, let me come to you, bearing in mind question 2 as well, just in terms of the areas you see in terms of being positive for your company, and also investment priorities. Do these match up with how you're seeing the year ahead?
Yeah, I think as I've sort of, you know, as one reflects on, I think these were always priorities for any internal, you know, the corporate comms teams. These were always priorities. You couldn't sort of say, I will not be talking to my employees today, but I'll focus on the external user. I don't think that much has changed. It remains as important. But I think as comms people, because now we are really operating in a, in let's say what, you know, in this pandemic, in this environment, how can we help our companies show up and be seen as being more responsible to our users, right, and our communities? How do we make sure that our outreach is not seen as touting our own horns, but actually being much more helpful to our users? How do we, in this polarized world, actually bring forth balanced views, create a place for dialogue and listening? How do we, in a society that's, you know, sort of trying to deal with so many unequitable issues, how do we ensure that we bridge the gap for those communities? There is a whole generation of people who are going to get online for the first time. How do we make sure we are arming them with the tools that they need to be able to deal with this whole world, new world, right? So I think as comms teams, our roles become those of advocating for our stakeholders across there seems to be an echo.
Please go ahead.
Sorry. So is, you know, being advocates for our stakeholders, also being the seat on the table that is focused on building trust. It's also the seat on the table that's providing the checks and balances for our companies to you know, do the right thing, and to make sure that we are looking at every aspect holistically, sustainability, both financially as well as, from an environmental perspective. Speaking for the user and every stakeholder, I think, had on that table, leadership table is where I see our roles as, and that's what's going to increase.
That's really interesting. So it's corporate reputation, it's employee engagement, it's crisis management, but it's not any of those things as perhaps they have traditionally been practiced. It is as those things perhaps should be practiced. It's as you put it, more holistic, more sustainable, treating stakeholders like people rather than, discrete audiences. It's trying to help them rather than just maybe selling to them. Tori, how do you see that in terms of an actual change in the way that some of these areas are practiced?
I think this idea of stakeholder capitalism or stakeholder engagement has been talked about for a long time, but this year I think has really brought that to the fore. I think one of the things I think has begun to really change is organizations having a point of view about things that historically perhaps they have not had a point of view about. So in years gone by, CEOs and C-suite could often stand behind, "Oh, that doesn't relate to my business," when asked about something. And I think many business leaders now are being asked to have a point of view, whether that's about the environment, or it's about the community, or it's about the application of digital technology, or the future of collaboration across boundaries and jurisdictions. So I think that we will begin to see business leaders becoming a bit more vocal about some of the broader things that are not just affecting their business, but about their communities and about their society as a whole. And I think that that's going to be tough for communicators to manage, because we have always, or many of us have always sort of pulled the questioning and pulled the analysis of an organization back to the business. And I think in a world of stakeholder capitalism, to be authentic and to be true and to serve, as Meenu said, all of those stakeholders, especially people like your employees and your customers, you are going to have to think in a much more rounded and a much more holistic way. And I think that will change the nature of business leadership.
Yeah, that is, I suspect, hopefully one of the positive trends to emerge from this year, a reset, let's say, of expectations of business, and as a consequence, hopefully a real shift in business behavior. Christopher, if I may ask you, while we're going through these results, if you could please push the next activity that we wanted to do through to our users. We'll continue going through these results now, but I would like to ask them to start doing another quiz, actually, where we will ask you to rate your expectations for communications recovery in 5 different areas. 1 is the lowest, 5 is the highest. So you can do that, and we will continue talking through these results. And Christopher, could I please see the results for question 4 now? So what role will communications play in driving business growth in 2021? So the good news here is that people either think communications is pivotal or important in driving business growth in 2021. So maybe we can all go home. But Elan, I'll put the question to you. Communications may well be important in driving business growth in 2021, but does that mean communicators will be pivotal and important when it comes to driving business growth next year?
So it's a great question. That means that from my perspective, I think communicators are pivotal or important if you can adapt to the new norm. It requires a lot. First, you need to have a digital mindset. It doesn't mean that you have to be very technical savvy, but you have to have a digital mindset, because you are going to talk to those people who are in the social world. Okay, so in the past, most of the corporate communicators are very wordy. We love long sentences. We love articles. We love analysis. Today, when you talk to the young generation, you found that a lot of times emotion goes first. And in the past, as Tori said, that the CEOs try not to express personal opinions unless it's linked with business, right? Today, you have to have a statement, something you stand for. So all these are the changers. If the communicators can adapt to those changers and not only survive, but also master the skills in the new world, of course, they are pivotal to the business growth. Otherwise, well, someone will replace your role.
So adaptation is critical to capitalize on these opportunities. Meenu, your take?
Look, if we see ourselves firstly, I'm glad we're at least referring to ourselves as communicators and not PR or media relations professionals. So that's the first great starting point. Second, I've always believed that if you want, I wouldn't want to be working if I didn't feel I was making an impact. So clearly, yes, we have to make an impact. Otherwise, really, like you said, let's all go home. There's nothing for us to really worry about. But more importantly, like I said, if you want that seat on that leadership table, you've got to be a business person who specializes in communications, right? So if you take that approach and you think like that and you work towards being that advocate for all of those stakeholders, you will make an impact. So I see comms always having a significant impact. I mean, you look at any of the trust parameter studies that show if brands do not sort of communicate well or are not being able to build that trust with their communities, people are walking away from those brands. So how we show up our company is going to be a very critical part of business growth.
Yeah, so adaptation and purpose. Let's move on to question 5, please. Okay, so which challenges can communications help your company most with in 2021? So first is corporate positioning in a polarized world. Second, interestingly, is consumer marketing. And it's interesting because consumer marketing was not listed as, or it didn't get a lot of support as a Marcom's investment priority. And yet it is positioned here as a challenge. But Tori, let me come to you first. I suspect you have some experience of how communications can help corporate positioning in a polarized world.
Yeah. I think, I just want to, in context of this, pick up on something that Meenu said. I think this idea of communicators being business people is really, really important. And I think that that's a trend in the communications industry as a whole. Whereas years ago, comms people used to be a proxy for either media relations or maybe employee engagement. You are expected as a comms leader to have a viewpoint on lots of different things. And I think to this question here, what are the challenges communications can help your company with? You have to absolutely understand the business. You have to understand the challenges that are coming down the pipe. You have to understand the backdrop. You have to understand all of your stakeholder groups. So for me, A is actually the overriding thing, because it's your corporate positioning in a polarized world, whether it's polarized or otherwise. How you are viewed, brand in its broadest sense of the word, is how people are going to view your organization. So as comms experts and leaders, I think we increasingly have to think strategically and operationally. And certainly for me, I have almost a mental checklist every time. What are my customers going to think? What are my employees going to think? What are my investors going to think? What are my competitors going to think? What are my regulators going to think? And quite often those groups actually are going to think very different things. And my path is to advise my executive on the best and the optimized way forward so that we don't upset any of those stakeholder groups. And polarization makes that actually doubly hard because people have a very personal view. So I think the nature of communications is really changing. And I think 2020, COVID-19, US-China relations has actually, if anything, elevated the importance of clear, accurate, good communications. You only have to look at some of the political leaders around the world, and no names mentioned, but I'm a Brit, so you can take from that what you will. The catastrophic communications being put out by political leaders. There's some good ones too, but I think comms is more important than it's ever been.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I think we're just going to move on to the next question, because I do want to get to the second activity as well. We have around 15 minutes left. We've also got some good questions coming in, and we will try and get to a couple of those as well. So question 6, do you believe you will increase hiring, be better funded in 2021? I'm really glad to see, when we looked at the results coming through ahead of this session, it was really heavily no. So actually, am I glad? This is a less interesting question to answer now, because everyone, well, more people are saying yes. In fact, a majority of people now expect to be increasing hiring and to be better funded in 2021. So Elan, let me just come to you and say, will you be increasing hiring in 2021? Will you be better funded? I'm sure your GMs want to know this answer as well.
I've already given my answer to them, say yes.
Okay, good. You heard it here first. And in particular, which areas will you be focusing that investment on?
It's interesting because different from some agencies that they basically do everything. Thing we say we are full service agency, but we have very focused practice areas, which I just mentioned: luxury, auto, healthcare, and corporate communications in general. And it's interesting that healthcare is in critical needs right now. I see robust growth, while the talents in this area is very limited, and there is a very high learning curve. So healthcare is the area I would definitely put in more effort to find a good talent. The second part, in the past year, we've experienced a huge change from Meenu, PR agency, to a communication agency. That means we changed the format of the communication from wordy sentences to a lot of other things: creative, design, online, social. So we will need talents that coming from non-traditional PR industries. This is a huge task that we also have this year. The third part is data. That's an area that I think actually PR communication industry needs to improve. We are not good in data, but we have to in today's digital age. So I'm also looking at data expertise who can work with the communication artists. So I always believe communication should be artist plus scientist. Well, a lot of times they don't work very well, but we have to find someone who can work with us. Okay.
Okay, great. Yeah, so healthcare, multimedia, and more science to go with, more art. All right, excellent. Very quickly, Meenu, let me come to you and ask, what are the areas that you are looking at as priorities in 2021?
So look, I think at different parts of the businesses are going differently, right? For us, the cloud business is growing tremendously. So we have a lot of, we've continued to hire during this period for that business. There's the whole area of education. There's a lot of work that's coming up in the area of health. So there are different aspects from a business side, but if you look at overall comms, I think definitely in social, in the area of internal comms, those are the two areas we're growing even more rapidly.
Okay, thank you. Christopher, may I ask you to show the results from the second exercise, if that is possible? And I wonder if you could also perhaps talk us through what we're seeing on the screen in front of us. That would be useful because it looked like a fairly high-tech chart that we were going to show people. Okay, cool. And Christopher, if you wanted to come in quickly and maybe just talk us through what these results mean.
Sorry, clicking a few buttons. So people had to rate on a scale of 1 to 5. I mean, we're looking at a spider chart. This is the global average of everyone who's taken it so far, and basically we see a very even spread between all of the variables that we asked participants to rate against. So it would, I'm not quite sure actually how to interpret this for the time being, because it looks like everything's a priority, everything's important, but we all know from experience that when everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, right? When everything's important, nothing's important. So it maybe we need to have a few more people log in and take it to see where we get a little more skew, but for the time being, it looks like it's pretty evenly spread.
Okay, thank you for that, Christopher. Yeah, so please feel free to take this activity even after this session is finished, and we can always report back with further results. I do see it does seem to be leaning. No, it doesn't. I was going to say it's leaning towards talent development, but actually, communications innovation and stakeholder engagement are all getting a support as well. And actually, that really reflects the discussion we've had on this session. I feel. I mean, those are three areas where that we have discussed. Perhaps, Christopher, if you can show the question wall now, and I can put some of those questions to the panelists. Here is a good one we got. And by the way, all of you, please do feel free to submit questions. I think we have time for at least to get through at least 2 or 3 before we move on to the next session. So here's one. There is too much activism in corporate communications. Tori, let me put that one to you, please.
Wow, I'm not really sure how to answer that, to be honest. So I assume by activism, there's that the question means that we are too noisy and we make too much noise within our function. I think, you know, good, if you step back, what is good communications? It's running the BAU of the business, thinking about the day-to-day, how you can support the organization. It doesn't have to be a business actually, but support the organization. And that's both a balance of tactical execution, good housekeeping, but also some strategic thinking. So if your business says, I am here today and in a year's time or 3 years' time, I want to be somewhere else, how do you then as a communicator help that business move forward? I assume it's not shareholder activism, which is something else. And obviously shareholder activism is not something as a corporate you can control. That is obviously at the behest of the shareholders. I think communications is actually quite a silent function. You only see the tip of the iceberg. And I think that's a source of great frustration, certainly for both in-house practitioners and advisors. Is, you know, we're all been on the receiving end of an executive saying to us, great piece in the Financial Times or fabulous piece in the Wall Street Journal. And then you think of all the brilliant new stuff you've done on employee engagement or sustainability or speech writing, which people don't really see, but it all contributes to brand and perception. So I would refute that sentence. I would say there is not too much activism in corporate communications.
I suspect some of this is down to perhaps getting corporates to take a stance on issues, and corporate communications is seen as a driving force in that. So whether that's, you know, Nike with its Colin Kaepernick campaign, or we've seen a number of companies come out with quite strong social stances on issues, often in response to employee pressure, sometimes shareholder pressure, as you mentioned, and just stakeholder pressure in general. Elan, what are your thoughts on that question? You're on mute, by the way, so we need to unmute you.
Okay, I'm unmuting myself because sometimes it could be disrupting. I'm afraid there will be even more activism in corporate communication in future. The question is, do you have a choice? For instance, can you avoid talking publicly on some public topics? Very sensitive topics are pushed today, whether on traditional media or is even more on social media, to talk about how you think of that. I give you an example, like the Black Lives Matter, right? If you think about it, do you have a choice to avoid this question?
Yeah,
I don't think so. So in order not to be inconsistent, you'd better prepare. And when you are pushed, you have a consistent answer already prepared to give. So this is something that I disagree.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, I think we may have lost Meenu because she looks like
I'm there.
Yeah.
she's frozen. But
No, I'm
so
there. I'm there. I'm there.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
yeah, we can hear you, but we can't quite see you. So
Not sure
might
why.
just. Okay, well, if we can hear you, then maybe I'll ask you for your thoughts on that. Do you think there is too much activism in corporate comms? And if you do drop out, then I'm going to come back to you, Tori.
I think, yes, there is and there should be. And like Elan said, and going back to my previous point that I raised, if you're going to be able as the representative of all of the stakeholders that the company, which are important for the company, you have to have that activism approach, right? I mean, you have to be cognizant of the world that we're living in and the environment in which we're operating, and be able to be the representative of the holders. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
was that?
Yeah, no, I think you're
Was that
breaking
not
up a
right?
bit. You're breaking up a bit, but we got your message actually. So as the corporate communicator, it's a really important point. You are the representative of stakeholders, and so you do have to be involved in that kind of activism. Tori, based on the responses you've just heard, how would you reconsider your view, perhaps?
No, I mean, I just want to come back on that because I think it's activism has a bad connotation. It's put in the same bucket maybe as feminism. You know, activism is not about raising something for the sake of raising it. You know, as we're a stock exchange and we have a whole community that is reliant on our business. We're not just interested in returning performance to shareholders. They're one of our stakeholders. I think it would be irresponsible as an organization to ignore some of these fundamental issues that affect our society and our communities and our future. And whether, as Elan said, that's the Black Lives Matter campaign, and that's a great example. Do you have to actually answer that? Yes, you do, but you don't have to answer it, I don't think, in relation specifically to Black Lives Matter. You can talk about it in relation to diversity. And diversity is a really powerful and important business factor. It's not just about gender or colour of your skin or your ethnicity. It is about diversity of thinking. And that stops things like groupthink. So I think activism shouldn't have bad connotations. Activism is what business should be doing. It should be caring about its broader stakeholder group, as Meenu said. So I would really refute that activism is something that is going to go away. If anything, I think corporates, I'm delighted that corporates are having a point of view and thinking outside of just profits.
Yeah, and quite honestly, I would agree with you. I honestly agree with everything that you've said on this question. If you like this discussion, the final session of the conference is specifically on geopolitics, so please do stick around for that. Last question very quickly, Elan, I'm going to put this to you alone. It's come through from one of our attendees. Given everything we've seen globally this year, are emerging markets prioritized or deprioritized in the year ahead?
Okay, so it depends. Emerging market, it depends on the market itself. At the end of the day, depending on the people in the emerging market, they still have money? Right now, my answer is yes.
Okay, great. That's good to hear. Tori, let me ask you for a one-word answer to that.
I think emerging markets are the future. There you are.
Good. Just as well, really, for everyone on this.
Yeah, maybe I would
session. All right, excellent. We have reached the end of our session. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Christopher. I think the Spark Up worked really well. We got some really good interaction, some great responses. I think it's clear that we're going to see changes in workforce, digital transformation, more holistic, more empathetic, more sustainable future. This is going to bring communications opportunity. And we are all activist communicators now. So thank you all. And we're going to move on to our next session, which is on creativity born out of crisis. So when the world around us experiences drastic change, our minds evolve to unlock a new level of creative potential. So will the events of 2020 drive more authentic creativity within communications or leave us worse off? It's a good question. And I think one thing we have seen this year is, some really interesting solutions to branding challenges, corporate challenges that many of us will never have considered before. So before I introduce the speakers, a quick pulse check for you, Christopher, if you wouldn't mind. It's a smiley face, if I remember correctly. And the question is, have the events of 2020 made brands and agencies more creative? Please provide your opinion. The smiley face is blinking. I don't know if I'm the only one that finds that a little bit disconcerting. By the way, if you haven't already, please do log in to SparkUp on your mobile devices. It's provoke.sparkup.live. Code is NXAZB. There is a different question wall for this session. Please bear that in mind. You'll see that on the For You screen, session 2 question wall. So please submit your questions on that. All right, so while we're answering this question, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers. OJ, if we could please add them to the session to help us explore the creativity that is born out of the COVID-19 crisis. We are very lucky to be joined today by Azmar Sukandar, who is not only the president of the Asia Pacific Association of Communication Directors, but also in her part-time, head of communications and society at Diageo. Azmar, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
And we've also got Polka Yu, who is the MD of Integrated Communications at BCW Asia Pacific. Hello, Polka.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Good to be here.
Okay, so let's go to the results. And it's looking like most people think the events of 2020 have made brands and agencies more creative, but it's not a landslide. Azmar, how do you feel about that?
Well, actually, I also voted, and I voted for the middle face, which is sort of slightly smiling. I like to think.
You hedged.
Sorry, I hedged. Yes, and I think that it's because I don't know if it's more creative than normal or being creative in a different way. And that's why I think that we've had to rethink maybe how we do business as usual. But I also wonder, would we not have done that anyway, given different circumstances? So that's why I picked creativity is still there. Is it different? Yes, but is it more? Not sure.
Okay. Interesting. I suppose the good news is that not many people have picked the sad face. Polka, where do you stand? Are you smiley face or are you sad face?
I'm definitely a smiley face. It just gives us so much pressure to outperform ourselves. So big smile.
That's true.
Okay. And I mean, you talk about the pressure. You see that making brands and agencies more creative. Is pressure always a good thing?
Depends, whether the pressure just make you want to run faster to deliver, or it actually give you time to pause and think. I have 2 minutes to rethink my strategy. I think one big question for all of us is not about throwing another virtual events. It's how do we make the virtual events more meaningful, more interesting, to cut through the clutter, to have a purpose, basically. So in that sense, it's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we have perhaps all learned is that parameters make people more creative. And if this year has brought us anything, it has certainly brought us new parameters. So that's something to bear in mind. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to hand over to Polka, who's going to take us through some examples so you guys can all just sit back and watch some interesting campaigns of creativity that's born out of crisis. So Christopher, thank you for stopping sharing your screen. Polka, over to you.
Thank you, everyone. So today I'm very happy to be here and also very happy always to talk to Arun and also meet Azmar. So today we're going to talk about creativity born out of a crisis. So, we're lucky to have the technology which make the transition from the usual events to virtual collaboration much more smoother. But we still miss the togetherness of a human being, after a while. Nothing can quite replace the warmth of human interaction. As I mentioned earlier, because I'm passionate about this topic, it's not about just throwing another virtual events, competing who has a bigger virtual events, who has the most advanced technology. It's also about how can we still add that human warmth to the virtual collaboration when the in-person contact is completely taken away from us, when all we have left is audio and visual. How do we maximize that? And I think the real answer lies behind this is beyond another creative gimmick. How do we search for a purpose when we create? We don't create for the sake of it. We pick an issue that's relevant for our client's target audience and do something about it. That's the key point of me today. So I would like to share with you three short cases. It's actually 3 different campaigns across our region. I only pick one element from each campaign under this overarching theme about meaningful creativity. So the first campaign is from our India team. The client is Taj Mahal Tea. So for the client side, they want to always support Indian classical music industry. And from our point of view as agency, we want to maximize the influence of the influencers. So as Taj Mahal Tea, the brand, every year sponsor the concert of the classical industry. So this year, because of the pandemic, they have to take the event virtually. So our role is to think, how do we still make the classical music industry interesting to the younger generation to stay more relevant? Because some of the younger people, they think it's for older generation. So one strategy is to emphasize the concept of Indian ragas. Now that's interesting concept because ragas is the fundamental framework of Indian classical music, which translated very often to the nowadays popular Bollywood music. Unfortunately, not many people know that. So our strategy is to educate the general public about that. So we invite a number of influencers to be part of the campaign. One of them is the Indian vocalist of classical music. She's popular. So she's part of our social media campaign. Every time she make a post, we have her sing a short ragas and invite the general public to guess which nowadays Bollywood music is based on that. Now, because the concept is so interesting, the overall campaign, as you see, has very high viewership and many media influencers chip in for free. As you see on the slide, the Business Stand, as one of the many media, just decide to do organic polling for us. When you have a purpose to support something real, people do want to participate. Now let's go to the next slide. I want to play this vocalist singing as part of the social media content.
मिले सुर मेरा तुम्हारा तो सुर बने हमारा। राग संगीत हमारी देश की मिट्टी से सदियों से जुड़ा हुआ है। अब बारी है आपकी इस कठिन वक्त में क्लासिकल म्यूजिक को साथ देने की। ब्रूक बॉन्ड ताजमहल प्रेजेंस सुर के साथ के अगले एपिसोड में।
So we try to maximize the impact of the audio and the visual to make it very warm and interactive. So next case, if you can go to the next slide, please. Next case is as for AliExpress. AliExpress is an international e-commerce site under the Alibaba group. Now, during pandemic, of course, they want to maximize the influence of the influencers who are active on this platform and sell more products eventually. And our role as the PR agency, our value is to be very sensitive and alerted about any emergent trend out of this pandemic. Now, during the pandemic, we noticed one topic gets increasingly popular. That is called shoppertainment. As you see from the word, two words, shopping and entertainment. Long story short, is influencers trying to entertain, trying to be creative, but also sell products at the same time. Now, why this become popular, we think about it, 3 reasons, and that's our purpose of the campaign. Number 1 reason for the general public, because they're bored during the lockdown. They spend more time on their mobile phones or laptop searching for anything entertaining. Number 2, for the influencers, sometimes some of them struggle to make enough income during the pandemic. They want to monetize their creativity. And number 3, for the brands, because we have a harsher KPI, we want to move faster from communication value to commerce, to convert the sales. So we decide the strategy for us is to own the concept of shoppertainment, to become the thought leader of that. Now in China, the shoppertainment trend is 1 step ahead of the world. China influencers are going crazy. They entertain when they sell. Some of them become millionaires, billionaires because of that. So our role is to host this virtual event, a platform for China influencers to share their tips with global influencers. So as you can see, many countries, influencers across the globe join this event. The coverage, because this concept is interesting and it has purpose, so it gets picked up by many heavy hitters in the global media and generate coverage worldwide. So can we go to the next slide? I want to just play 20 seconds of this short event for you.
It's like a hobby, but with the difference that you know that it's a work.
Live shows makes me more, I think, expressive.
Everyone says, oh, Kenny, this job is really suitable for you.
Okay, just to give you some quick taste of that, let's go to the 3rd campaign. 3rd campaign is for another client we have in India. It's a Britannia Marie. So basically, the purpose here is you can't lock down my dream. We want to help people with their startup business. The campaign idea is to support homemakers across India to pitch their business ideas to seasoned entrepreneurs. And you will see in the video, it captures their emotions. Some people just start crying, and more than 1.5 million homemakers took part. Of course, the top homemakers, they win a significant amount of funds to help them turn their business into reality, turn their dreams into reality. And about 10,000 of them actually receive certified courses from National Skill Development Corporation. So it's a real impact on everyday people's life. There is, again, meaningful creation. So let's go to the next slide. We want to play the video in full, and that will be the end of my session.
Homemakers by nature are so entrepreneurial in the way they manage their homes, we think it is a cinch that they can actually do the same thing when they go outside their homes as well. This is exactly what Britannia Marigold, my startup initiative 2.0 sets out to do.
मेरे हस्बैंड दूर में नौकरी करते थे, इसीलिए मुझे घर का काम का साथ बच्चों को भी देखना पड़ा। इस बीच मैंने मेरे इंटरेस्ट का स्वीट्स और शुगर फ्री स्वीट्स बनाना शुरू की। मुझे अपना केटरिंग बिजनेस शुरू करना है।
फैमिली प्रॉब्लम होने के कारण इस समय मेरे पास इनकम का कोई स्रोत नहीं है, इसलिए मैंने इस कॉन्टेस्ट में भाग लिया। अगर मैं इस कॉन्टेस्ट में जीतती हूँ तो इससे मेरी आर्थिक स्थिति में सुधार होगा
I participated in this contest mainly because I thought it would give wings to my dreams. Till now, it has been a dream, and with the funds I receive, I can finally take it forward.
Hold your breath because this is where we reveal the final winners.
अच्छा लगा मुझे ये प्राइज मिलके मैंने बहुत स्ट्रगल करके इतना तक पहुंची हूँ।
प्राइज मिलने की वजह से मैं प्राउड फील कर रही हूँ, खुश हूँ और मैं अब अपने बिजनेस को अच्छे से स्टार्ट कर पाऊंगी।
I can't express such a happiest moment. My dream come true.
I don't know what to say. I had a lot of conviction in my idea. I thank you, Britannia. Feel absolutely fantastic. It's a great feeling. You were the first one to believe in me and see where I am today.
जैसे ही रिजल्ट डिक्लेयर हुआ, पल भर में मुझे लगा कि मेरे सपने पूरे हुए। मुझे इसमें बहुत आगे जाना है।
Wow. Well, it's got a little bit dusty in here, I think, after that last video. I think that when Polka said she was going to play that full campaign, she said, it will make people cry. And I think that's always a laudable goal for any conference. So we are actually running out of time now. We're going to run over for a few minutes. And of course, I'm going to come straight to you, Azmar. And I'm going to ask you, just bearing in mind everything you've seen, the case studies there, you can also see some of the questions from the audience coming through and your own experiences at Diageo. How are you seeing creativity changing this year?
I think that, first of all, thank you for showing all the very, very positive case studies that you shared, Polka, especially the last one. It always a nice way to kind of, sort of have a jolt to the morning. Very positive. I think that, some of the things you said earlier also resonated in that, when you are, when there's pressure, right? When there's pressure to perform and there's very constrained parameters, I think people are resilient. It's almost like you don't have a choice. You really have to push yourself. And you push yourself, I think, in the realms of how do you make things work? And I think at the end of the day, that's kind of a propeller of energy for creativity. How can you make this work given X, Y, Z? And when we were first discussing, it's like, it feels like the world is full of lemons right now. So how do we Beyonce and lemonade it all? And however it kind of appears for you. And I think that's where all this, I feel, is coming from. And we're similar in I think as people, and how do we make something work when you have whatever parameters. I think also that, I see a comment here is that creative cannot be judged on its own creative merits. You have to look at the desired outcomes. Absolutely. It is about, at the end of the day, what are you trying to achieve? And I think the brands still have the same ultimate goal as a brand, which is, raising your awareness of profile in a positive way, but also at the end of the day, really selling products, whatever it might be, biscuits, tea, etc. And for us, sort of spirits. So you put that into context, I think, when you have this greater events, and you have to put yourself into the shoes of your consumers, of the life things that they're going through, right? Beyond the sort of buying your product or not buying your product. And I think that also informs some of the creativity that we've seen to be, sort of to appeal to the emotion, to be more sensitive to what people might be going through, but also, not crossing that line to being crass, to kind of want to sell your product. So I think that's kind of an interesting conundrum, and different companies and brands and organizations have taken different tack on it. Some may have actually retreated and not said anything at all. But I think that we've come to a stage where that is not an option. The world is the way it is now. You still have to, run your business for your people because they all need jobs, as well as, the business needs to keep running. So I think then you start thinking really, okay, how do you do this?
Yeah, it's very useful advice. And just as a final word, Polka, because we are out of time, we will share these videos, by the way. And of course, you can access all of the questions and thoughts on your Spark Up. Polka, what's your advice for people that perhaps maybe not feeling creative this year and are finding that actually the challenges seem insurmountable?
Okay, that's such a good question. I guess I have to ask, what's the reason for not feeling creative this year? Because every year we have different challenges. Sometimes it's a very tight timeline. Sometimes it's just a very high goal of meeting the sales target at the end of the day. I think, because it's a general question, my general answer is to look around, see all the amazing cases, try to find your positive energy out of it. And just now when I played the case, I saw the smile on Arun, your face. And that's, kind of motivation for me next time. So for me, it's, creative for the sake of it. It's hard to keep your passion about it because it turned out to be another gimmick. It's all about what do we do as the final outcome and how can we actually make a difference on people's life. This is very general advice, I know. So overall, that's how I keep myself motivated to create on.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we've just started another activity, which you can see on your Spark Ups now. So we're asking, what are the challenges you are facing when it comes to creativity this year? And Polka, you've just talked about looking around and seeking out inspiration, I suppose. As one of the attendees has put it via the Spark Up, there's so much negative news that drains energy. Budget cuts is getting a lot of support on here as well, which I guess also drains energy. Someone else has put forward getting my corp comms team to think differently, and then there's an undercurrent of stress and anxiety among various team members. Azmar, what's your response, bearing in mind some of these observations? It's almost as if you need to be part comms director, part motivational guru.
I think we all kind of have to for ourselves. I think, if we look at it, we've been looking at external communications here, but even internal communications, which I do a lot of, how do you help and support your own people? As you know, they're dealing with challenges of work from home and all these other things that are part of you as a person. So I think, taking that into account when you communicate with each other as well and giving each other a little bit of space. It's challenging, and I think depending on which markets you're in, and budget cuts for sure is another in itself, as well as budget cuts, but also more pressure to deliver because we're all in a challenging market with all our companies also needing to kind of make market share, whatever it might be. I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and in some ways you almost have to cut yourself a break and just be like, okay, it's all happening. I might not be able to do every single thing that I set out to do, but there are things that I can do. And what could that be? Maybe, sort of trying to give yourself a little space and try to give each other a bit of space. And I think one of the things that we do for internal comms is also trying to find, we're all on Zoom all the time. It's like for various types of meetings. And so you ask yourself, when did you just have a chat with someone? Because every time you have a Zoom call, it seems like you have to go into the work itself. But we also emphasize things like those connections, like you were saying, Polka, making connections is really key, I think, as we sort of remind ourselves that there's positives to the things that we're going through, and then channeling some of that energy, maybe some of that frustration into something of what can I do about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because looking at the comments coming through, and please keep them coming, and please keep upvoting what other people are saying too. There's despondence from consumers, and then a good comment from Hemant Goel in India, keeping employee morale high in the face of uncertainty. Polka, do you feel that brands almost have a responsibility now to, I suppose, spark joy?
Yeah. I think it's a brand's responsibility now to just generate optimism, to give people hope. Also put things into perspective. It's not the end of the world. For me, the thing I actually motivate myself and my team is like, we are safe and we still have a job, and let's see what we can do. It's all about, we always say that turning a crisis into opportunity, what we can do with that. With COVID-19, for example, some brands we know in our Malaysia market, they are creating this mobile journalism training internally. Azmar, you may be interested to that. So basically training their in-house team. Okay, there is a budget cut. We may not be able to outsource everything to agency. Let's roll up the sleeves and do that ourselves. Let's get a training invented for that called a mobile journalism. I think you all know that from the name of it. And let's just address some of the problems within our capability. For example, another brand we work with, we're very proud of the idea. We know people don't sleep well. So many scientific research shows that people's sleeping quality dropped significantly because of depression, because of pandemic. Then how do we actually do some project to help people improve the sleeping quality? How do we bring AI into the program to make it fun? So we're actually monitoring people's sleeping data, turn them into lullaby, the little joy we can create together with the brand. That's one way to keep up, to keep giving people optimism.
Yeah, I mean, certainly from my perspective, it's, even in our business, we've had to reimagine a lot of things. And, mentally it is hard, but the opportunity has been huge. Azmar, how do you, I suppose, you talked about some of the work you've done at Diageo, I think in relation to Johnny Walker specifically. How do you kind of help people make that shift so they see things as a creative opportunity rather than a challenge that will just, kind of change years of status quo?
Well, I think, first of all, the context was when we chatted was Johnny Walker celebrates its 200th anniversary this year. With any other, any brand, that's an incredible milestone. But of course, with the world the way that it is, a lot of the initial plans that we had on how we would be celebrating this milestone kind of, sort of were shifted. And there was a lot more emphasis then and almost like an introspection on the quality of the product itself, the liquid. What is it? What does it taste? What does it mean to people? And then the values of the brand. And so we tapped into that instead and also looked at our own employees and said, in this context that we're facing now, the famous motto, keep walking, is even more relevant than ever. For ourselves, and if we look at ourselves before we even talk externally, and how do we tap into that in the way that we look at how we do things, and so we sort of galvanize sort of internal programs around using the anniversary as a peg, but also around the idea of sort of resilience and creativity and pioneering and innovation, to get people to think about doing things slightly differently. In this current environment, and how can you almost like we even had an internal competition of what are some hacks, like your work from home hacks, or what things have helped you as you think about the new environment that we're in. And some of them were internal, looking at our own systems, and then some were sort of how we do things externally, and there was a lot of appreciation for that, I think, of just sort of giving people space. Also, I think giving people a different sort of space to think about how they might do something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very helpful. I think very useful advice, actually, just in terms of getting people to shift how they see things, which I think has been one of the biggest challenges this year. Polka, we have a couple of minutes in the session left. I wanted to come to you on this budget cut question, because that is still the top-ranked challenge when it comes to creativity, according to the attendees in this session. And I'm sure you would always like bigger budgets, but are budget cuts always a challenge to creativity, or can they be helpful? Not that I want this to turn into an encouragement for people to cut budgets, but I think you know what I mean.
Yes, definitely. I know what you mean. Of course, it depends on, to what extent the budget is cut and whether it's a reasonable budget cut. And I echo you, I like big budgets. But I think with the reasonably smaller budgets, you can still be very creative. It actually make you pause to think, can I make this angle more interesting? What's the, as I talked earlier in my case study, we as agency, our value is because we are outsider. and we have a helicopter view of a number of clients and different trends, different industry movements. I think our value together with the client is we need to be very sensitive about what's the next hot topic. What's the one thing that really motivates the target audience or dampens them, bothers them to keep them up at night, what makes them emotional. And when you get to that human truth, the human insight, you get lots of organic content, which is not necessarily to generate with bigger budgets. So you get a campaign with much higher return on investment from your client. And because you have interesting concept, people like to chip in. So I think if the budget cut is reasonable, it just pushes you to really go back to the root of PR, to think about what can go viral without too much advertising push. Actually, I quite like that challenge, to make you also think about the platform you do that. If you can do another mobile live streaming, if you can do another free collaboration, why not? So far, actually, although the budget cut does limit us, but actually we do have several very inspiring creative campaign in the pipeline. We just have to be very diligent with ourselves to think it through, to push for one more half an hour brainstorming. How can we make it more organic? Does this really go viral? So that's my key take of the time.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. Some really useful advice just in terms of how we can change our perceptions, how brands can help address the despondence felt by consumers. And of course, I think really useful reminder of the importance of a bias towards action as a way of driving creativity. So thank you all. We're going to move on to our next session, which is the last session before the break. It's on employee engagement. It's actually a session that we're doing in partnership with the Asia Pacific Association of Communication Directors. And to moderate this session, I get a break, which is always good. I'm going to hand over to PRovoke Media's Asia Pacific correspondent, David Blecken. So I will just wait for him to appear like magic on my screen. Please note that you can, of course, keep on using the Spark Up for this session too. You can keep on posing questions on the question wall and post your thoughts and everyone can respond. Oh, David's online now. I will hand over. I think you've seen enough of me for one morning. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Arun. And hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. And as Arun mentioned, this session we have partnered with the APAC-D, so I'd like to thank them as well. Okay, so over the past year, employee engagement, together with internal communications, has been thrust into the spotlight, firstly by company CEOs, and then more recently by the advent of COVID-19. So in this session, we're going to look at how it's changing, what the future of employee engagement is likely to look like once we get through the pandemic. So I think we have lots to talk about. Before I introduce our panelists, I'd like to remind everybody to log into SparkUp. You can log in via provoke.sparkup.live, and the code is NXAZB. So Christopher, could you please launch our first SparkUp activity? And for this, I'd like to ask our audience to describe in one word employee engagement in 2020. And I'd also like to remind everyone that they can submit questions via the SparkUp question wall over the course of this session, and we'll try to get to some of those. Okay, so while we're waiting for those responses to come in, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So joining us today, we have Angelena Cala, who is Global Head of HR for Standard Chartered Bank. We have Ferry de Bakker, who is a business consultant and lecturer at NTU's communication faculty. And we have Karen Wong Chayavirabood, who is regional director of public affairs for Abbott. Okay, can everyone, I think some of you might need to unmute.
Hello, David. Very nice to meet all of you. Unfortunately, the video isn't showing up, so I apologize on my end, as long as you can hear me.
Oh, your video, we could just see you a minute ago, but now you've gone.
Oh dear. The joys of technicalities in digital.
Okay, well,
Morning, David.
Hello, Angelena, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you see me? My screen's a bit frozen, so
okay, now I
it
can.
might be a delay.
Okay, I can see you. Yes, yes. Okay.
Yeah, and good morning from me as well.
All right, great. Okay, are we seeing the results coming in yet, Christopher? Can we have a look at some of the words that people are using?
Yep, they're being shared now on the cast screen on Zoom.
Okay. Okay, can I ask people, can you see that, both of you? Ferry, Angelena? No, we cannot actually.
I still have the previous one, so
yeah, so do I.
Obviously, it's working.
Okay, I think we might need to come back to that.
Yeah, maybe we start the discussion instead.
Okay, all right. Well, perhaps I can ask you folks in one word to describe employee communications over the past year. Ferry, perhaps we can start with you.
Well, it's about a year and a half ago that we presented a report done after research on the future of the Chief Communication Officer. And then we had a panel discussion, a roundtable discussion with 9 professionals who unanimously voted for employee engagement as the most important subject that communicators would have to deal with in the years to come. Little did we know that we would then end up with the COVID-19 situation, which sort of sped up that whole focus on employee engagement. So, but if I have to use, like one word, I would use 3 words to tell you how I feel about COVID-19 and the way we have reacted to it, and that is, I am totally amazed that practically everybody is jumping to conclusions without knowing what the future brings.
Jumping to conclusions. Okay, yes, there's been a lot of that. And I think that's a very fair point. Nobody knows what the future holds. Okay, we can see some of the words now. So we have sensitive, we have overwhelming, challenging, info overload, frantic. Angelena, what do you think about what's being said here?
The word that I have isn't up there. I'll say the word human.
Human?
Yeah.
And why do you say that?
I think employee engagement it's a multi-million-dollar industry, right? We run these surveys every year. We look at the data. We try to do something about it, and leaders get very, very passionate about it as if it is a customer survey feedback form about how they're doing, which actually isn't, because a good leader doesn't need a survey to tell them, how engaged your employees are. I think what COVID has done is to make that industry beyond a survey, right? It's about the human aspect of how leaders connect with their employees in a new way. And in that new way, I'm not talking about technology, I think in a very humane way of saying, how are you doing? right? What's been happening in your life? How's working from home been for you? And trying to really connect an intimacy between, the employer, the organization, on one hand, which has often been seen as a large institution, without maybe some degree of humanity, to the fact that everybody now is working remotely. No one's in the building. How do we know how people are doing? I think that's why I put the word human. I think that's what employee engagement in 2020 is about.
Okay. Karen, can I come to you?
Yeah, sure. I think from a healthcare perspective, and having been at Abbott for 10 years, I think the whole pandemic has shifted and made us rethink about what employee engagement is all about. And it's really about advocacy. I think the word that comes to mind is now more than ever, we've kind of noticed the importance of bringing the company's purpose and the value to life for employees, because they need to feel proud and value. And how does their work, right, impact the community that they serve? And that's been very, very critical. So for me, it's really about understanding purpose and value, and how one can actually do that very, very useful and very real is through storytelling. And that's internal storytelling.
Okay. So we were seeing we were seeing a lot more attention given to employee engagement and internal communications before the pandemic hit us. But according to a Gallup poll from 2017, just 13% of employees said they actually felt engaged by their companies. So I'd like to ask Ferry a question. Do you believe companies when they say that employees are now their most important stakeholders? Why should this suddenly be the case? I'd like to know what you think about this.
Well, we've heard these stories before, and there are statements like our employees are our most important asset, for example. And that's all fine as long as it's practiced. And some companies have been traditionally good at this, and the reasons may vary. But overall, I think that the battle for real talent has intensified in the last 5 years, and that has given the CEOs and the C-suite the need to engage with employees better than they had done before, to attract talent and then to keep it, rather than to lose it to the competition. So I think that for me is the overall number one reason.
Okay, and are we in agreement that the pandemic has basically helped move things along? Perhaps I can ask Karen, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think that the pandemic has definitely moved things along into a very different perspective. And I completely agree with what Ferry has said, that, by just saying that employees are the most important stakeholders in the organization, we need to take it even further by calling them, actually, they're our consumers. They're at the center of everything that we do. And hence it's important that we deal and treat and engage our employees with different platforms or, channels. And I think the session before this, they talked about digital earlier, right? It's no longer in a way that one speaks down or it's a one-way street. It's really about a two-way social connected environment. And that allows to bring a better purpose, values to the organization, and how, one company, and I speak for Abbott, for example, we've kind of used a sort of digital one-stop shop mobile-friendly platform, which allows employees to participate, engage, receive feedback, as well as co-create stories. So this allows for very personalized, customized content that it can be used and seen and read and engaged around the globe. So all the walls around a particular country has been broken down to that extent, where employees can get a chance to see what's happening outside of their world, be inspired, and participate, right, in all those conversations and making them feel proud and relevant.
When we think about who should own communications, I mean, it seems that at the moment we have various people sort of trying to take ownership. But it would seem, when you think of internal communications, it should be the communications department taking responsibility for this. But I think there's some confusion here at the moment, and there might be some tension as well. Angelena, how do you see this playing out? And also, how might you address an issue like tension between communications and human resources?
You asked the toughest one for me, I guess. Look, I think to what Karen has said, I think the pandemic has really reset the working relationship and the rules of engagement between the departments. Because I think first half of the year, it wasn't about who owned it. I think we had a crisis that we were dealing with. So it was really very much around human resources, intercommunication, corporate affairs, all coming together, because we had a situation on hand that we weren't familiar with. And how do we reach out? I think because one of the wonderful, and I know that sometimes in the world of the pandemic right now, we don't often think about the good things. And this is one of the good areas. We restarted that collaborative and alignment to what exactly do we need to do for our employees? What do we need to do for our shareholders? What do we need to do for society? And that message has to be consistent. So moving on from now, in my personal experience in SCB at the moment, I'm driving a huge culture initiative for the wholesale bank. But the natural reaction to this right now is I collaborate with our internal comms, because that habit of working together is kind of my new way of modus operandi. So I would say that I think if there is still tension, I think we need to understand that the benefit of us coming together in the first half of the year to address the pandemic has shown us a different way of working. I think embracing that is really key. As a human resource person, I put the human side, the employee viewpoint. My internal communication colleague, he is the one who tells me, well, that's what you need to do. That's what, you can't say that. So I think it's been very, it's very good collaboration. I would just maybe, summarize by saying the pandemic gives us an opportunity to reset.
Reset and collaboration. So Karen, is it always happy collaboration?
Yes, it's always a happy collaboration, and I think it's a constant adjustment. And I think from a lens, from a healthcare, from an Abbott perspective, we've certainly evolved, right, the way we communicate and engage with employees. So I talked a little bit earlier about the importance of personalized customers and mobile-friendly platforms, very similar to a social channel that we use internally. And it's truly being owned by employees, by everybody, because they are able to influence, share, and inspire, right, all the other employees around the world. And together with human resources, this is all packaged in together in a very integrated way. I think the other observation that we've had, and it's not just about campaigns, but we've realized that employees want to know what that single purpose is. And this also stems from top down, where leaders in any organization, right, they need to also share their personal stories and make it relevant, that people can have that affinity and it resonates with them. So we've really seen how, top down, bottom up, the pandemic has enabled people to sort of see and experience the way how we, or the company in this instance, has managed to impact and help people through life-changing technology. And I think last but not least, I wanted to add, is that the importance of, face-to-face in this moment of time has taken a pause. But still, there are opportunities where leaders or line managers are able to engage with their teams in a more authentic, right, in a more personalized way through more frequent, perhaps webinar, phone calls, or, informal engagements to extend their care and support. Also with regards to informal networks, I'm not sure if this is also done in many other companies, but perhaps these informal employee networks may be, for a common purpose, whether or not it's diversity and inclusion. For example, within Abbott, we have this women leaders at Abbott, where we encourage women to come together to learn and exchange and understand, right? How can they sort of acknowledge this whole piece around, issues of, science, tech, or engineering and math? How do they understand to becoming stronger leaders in times of, difficulties or issues, but also mentoring? So I think there are different ways and facets, right, that can be complemented to the role of the CEO, where he sets the tone, and then it bubbles up from top down, bottom up, and all of us are collaborating together.
Ferry, let me ask you a question about the CEO. We have a comment here as well, which says a real leader listens. Engagement is all about listening. But from your perspective, what is the role of the CEO in employee engagement? And also in conservative industries like healthcare, both banking and healthcare are conservative industries, I think it's safe to say. How unbuttoned can the CEO afford to be?
Okay, thank you for this interesting question. My Master of Communication students and I have just completed a research project on employee engagement in partnership with Edelman and Mercer. So I've done over 30 interviews with either C-suite executives, HR executives, or communication. And normally, when I do this kind of research, after about 10 interviews, I roughly know what's going to happen and what people are going to say. But not in this case. Even up to the last of the interviews that I've done, I discovered very interesting, unusual facts. Overall, it's the CEO who owns it most of the time. This can go terribly wrong when the CEO, when you have a passionate CEO, is replaced by another. This just happened last year in one of the most upmarket hotel chains, where the CEO retired and was replaced by the CFO, who immediately told his management team that he was not going to talk to any employees at any time because he didn't see that as his role. So that dented the whole employee engagement project. Most of the time as a CEO, what I've seen is that in companies that are doing extremely well in employee engagement, the issue of silos and of, say, communication department and HR department working against each other has kind of disappeared. The companies who are doing really well usually have teams that include both experts from both sides. But the most interesting answer to the question, who owns this, came from one of the top three Singapore banks who responded, in our bank, it's the employees who own it themselves. They decide what needs to be done by management. They set the KPIs for management, and then they run the employee engagement program. So I think, particularly, you mentioned the banking industry as one of the most conservative. Singapore in itself is basically a conservative society. For a bank to embrace this concept, I think this is absolutely fantastic.
And if that's the case, if it is employees that own it all, how helpful are external consultants like PR agencies? How much are they useful? Karen, let me ask you that.
Sure. So thanks for the question. First, I want to acknowledge what Ferry has said correctly, that employees own it, but I think the CEO sets the tone, right, and reinforces the purpose and values and culture. And if you switch it into a PR agency world, for us, I think PR agencies can share how the world outside our walls is changing, and they can give us an external perspective on how we can improve and do better. So a lot of the work, in fact, most of the work that we do at Abbott is done internally. And we do seek to sort of soundboard ideas from the outside so that we have an inside out and outside in view to sort of have the best fit or find that sweet spot.
Okay. Angelena, I have a question for you about staff surveys. These seem to have become an industry in their own right. But are these useful? Do these actually help you?
I think when you talk about if it's useful, I think we need to understand from an organization perspective, what does it do? What's the purpose it serves? Right? So why do we do it? Whilst I made the comment that leaders should not need a survey to let them know how engaged their teams are, but from a very practical standpoint, at SCB, we have about 100,000 employees. The board, as well as the senior management team, would ideally like to understand either whether there are areas of concerns or areas of interest that the employees perhaps are not funneling upwards. So I think that for itself, the value of the staff survey is it's critical. On a year-to-year basis, we do have some analysis done in terms of location, and it's sometimes a reflection of the bank's strategy or the emphasis that we're taking for that year. So if I kind of linearly look at the objectives of the survey from the bank perspective, the value, then yes, it does. I think where the value gets diluted a little bit is, from an employee standpoint, is nothing's done about it. So they've spent 10 minutes and 15 minutes putting through what they think, and they were really provocative questions. But the question from the employee standpoint is, so what now? All right, so from the organization, when I look at this, is besides letting the board and senior management know about it, is at the more, I guess, lower down the hierarchical food chain, is how can we respond? What are we reacting to, right? Are we going to change the way we work, or are we going to change the way we lead? From an HR standpoint, I find these surveys quite useful because sometimes we do plant some of, more kind of hot flavors of the year type questions. So we get a sense of, for example, some of our benefits issues that we might be looking at. This year in particular, at SCB, we spent quite a bit of the questions around well-being. Right? So from the employees, we could understand out of the 100,000, not everybody, but say 85% responded. We understood where was the pulse, what were people feeling, what was the barometer on challenges from working from home, right? That now has helped shape some of our changes in our thinking around benefits. So I think it all depends on how you define value. To completely do away with that survey, that's possible, I think, depending on the size of the organization as well.
Okay, thank you. We're actually already running out of time, but I'd like to ask Christopher if we could launch our last activity for this, which deals with, okay, here we are, here's our question. So if I can ask people to finish this sentence: the future of employee engagement is. So again, a one-word activity. And while people are doing that, I'd like to ask one more question of Ferry. What do you think still needs to change? I understand that your research found that things like town halls are still very widespread, despite evidence that they don't really do very much at all. What are your thoughts here?
Oh, what needs to change? Well, first of all, one thing that nobody mentions is that employee law needs to be changed.
Employee law?
Yes. What are workers' rights and responsibilities? And for example, what happens if someone working at home gets an accident? Is the company responsible for this? Or, and this is just one question, but there are like hundreds that need to be answered. And we're talking about working from home. This is like 2 weeks ago, because the situation may have changed again. 84% of French office workers had returned to their desks in their offices. So what does that tell me? And you have like Jack Dorsey of Twitter saying working from home is forever. And then you have the CEO of Netflix who's saying it's a pure negative. So, this leads me to what I started with, which is, there are too many assumptions of people who, and we really don't know, what COVID-19 or any other pandemic that may follow is going to do to the economy and to the way we work. So, what needs to be done, I think, first of all, is scenario planning, so that companies and other organizations are prepared for various scenarios that might happen in the near and near future, and in 5 and 10 years' time.
Okay. Last question, I'd like to put it out to everyone, whoever would like to answer this. Do you think employee engagement will continue to be treated as seriously as it is now once we finally put the pandemic behind us? In fact, Karen, I'm going to ask you that just to move things along.
Sure.
But I'd like you all to just give a brief opinion on this, please.
Yeah, so truly, as what we shared at the start, employee communications cannot be seen as a one-way street, right? Going forward post-pandemic, I think the new norm is really about organizations finding that sweet spot, whether is it to use digital to exchange that two-way communications, but it's really about creating advocates within the company. And this trend will continue because today's employees want to know the purpose. We need to create a culture where employees feel proud, understand what they work and what they do in a company, and how their company's success is contributing actively, and what their success is and how they contribute to that purpose.
So, David, I'll go next.
Yep.
Not wanting to sound flippant, I think employee engagement is going to be absolutely critical, right, for the years to come, until the human aspect of the work gets replaced by robots. Then perhaps employee engagement will take a completely different definition. What I would say to that is, however, there will be always organizations that revert back to the old selves, where they take for granted that the employee are doing well, and that connectivity and engagement is less important. So I do, I think I do take a very practical view around that. There will be organizations who continue to do really well. The likes of, I think, listening to Karen, and the likes of Bloomberg. And, I think with SCB right now, we are definitely going to focus and continue to sustain this level of engagement.
Ferry?
Okay. Well, I've never understood why most companies, put in their mission statements or whatever else they have, that their customers are their number one priority. I've never understood that. For me, employees are the number one priority. And to close with a quote from the book of L. Reed on positioning: if you take care of the inside will take care of the outside. So that is how incredibly important employee engagement is, and why it must be the number one priority.
All right, well, let's hope you're right. I think that brings us to the end of our session. There's lots more we could talk about, but we're going to take a 10-minute break now, and we should return at around 11:25. So thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. Thanks to all the panelists.
Thank you.
We are going to break now for 10 minutes, but we'll actually come back at 11:28, let's say, because we're running a little bit over. David had a few curveballs to deal with there. We like to keep our moderators on our toes. Thanks very much, David, for handling them so well. And a huge thank you to Christopher Dometer at SparkUp. Thank you. I really think you can all see how much SparkUp added to the first 3 sessions today. After the break, we're going to come back and we're going to have some sessions that will not be using SparkUp. They'll be more freewheeling kind of discussions. So we'll see you all in 10 minutes. Thank you all.
Go ahead, Paul.
Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a fruitful break. We're going to continue with a panel. I'm, by the way, Paul Holmes, founder of what used to be the Holmes Report and is now PRovoke Media, coming to you from London. Delighted to be here. We are going to continue with a panel of independent PR firms looking at what I, for one, consider to be the entrepreneurial advantage. I think our history of research in the industry, and particularly into growth across the industry, demonstrates that over the last 7 or 8 years at least, independent PR firms have been growing at about twice the rate of the publicly traded big holding company agencies. And we're going to take half an hour or so to explore why that is and whether it will continue and whether the events of the last year or so have made any difference to that. It's a fairly short panel, so I'm going to jump right in. And I thought the best way to introduce you to my panelists would be for them to tell you a little bit about their firms and their status in their respective markets. Before we do that, a quick housekeeping note. We've switched the Q&A format for the final 2 sessions. So questions should be submitted using the chat box on the right of Zoom. You can type your questions in and they will find their way through to us, and we will try to leave 5 or 6 minutes at the end of the session for your questions. But Madan, why don't you lead off and tell us a little bit about your firm?
Thank you, Paul. I think I must begin this session like we do all things in India with a prayer. And the prayer says, thank God we are independent. It gives us the agility to do the right things, the strength to do things that are good for our people and our clients. It helps us to change course in real time as a crisis or adversity hits us. And we are, more important, we are able to practice what we preach to our clients all the time. So that's a good thing. As an organization, I think when the pandemic hit us, all of us were impacted. So was AdFactors. But I think we have done well. We have recovered fast. And as things go by the end of October, which is 6-7 months, because we really started feeling the heat in March, we should be back to our March levels. And we are still hoping to have a growth here, even if it is 1% growth. But we will maintain our legacy of 23 years of having growth year on year, and we hope to do it this time as well. The organization is very inspired. We have done a number of things in this, and there's been such a time for soul searching and course corrections that I think we have, as a team, we have done fine.
Angela.
So I'm from a firm called Senate SHJ. We're based in Australia and New Zealand. We are proudly independent, but we're also part of the PROI worldwide. So we get to remain independent and work alongside fantastic agencies from across the world, including Madan at AdFactors, and maybe we can try and loop Lina in as well. Our firm, we believe that there's a sort of intrinsic link between culture and reputation. So we work very much on the internal side, internal communication as well as reputation, and very much in the change space. And as one could imagine, as a result of that, we've had a very busy year.
And Lina.
Well, it's lovely to be here today among both Madan and Angela as well. So I'm Lina, I'm the MD for Mutant. We are based in Singapore and Malaysia, so it's in Southeast Asia, and very similar, just echoing the same thoughts that Madan and Angela had. We are also very fiercely independent, and you would get a clue, I guess, in the name of our agency is called Mutant because we want to constantly evolve, and it's very, very critical for us to have that independency layer as well, because that's the only way I feel like we're able to be nimble and agile. And very similar to what Madan said, I think I also feel that this is a great opportunity amidst the pandemic. I do find a lot of clients, a lot of brands looking at independent agencies as well, because we're quick to pivot overnight and make things happen. And because of that, I think while the year started out with us trying to manage everything in cash flow, I would say that I'm very hopeful for a growth year, in fact, like looking into Q4 coming up. So here's to independence.
I'm really interested. I love the name Mutant, by the way, and I think one of the things we've seen is in recent years, and in this year particularly, is that ability to change quickly, to adapt to new circumstances, whether it's the rise of digital, whether it's the increasing importance of data and analytics, all the things that we've seen over the recent years, or right now, whether it's to shift your focus to employee communications in the age of COVID, or corporate reputation and purpose in the age of COVID, is really important. Now, we've seen independent firms throughout that period be much more flexible and much more nimble than big agencies. And I wonder, how much of that do you feel is a factor of size? In other words, that you're just smaller and it's easier to add a data and analytics capability to a 40-person firm than it is to a 2,000-person firm, or whether there are in fact other structural advantages to being independent that make it easier to change and adapt. And Lina, you're the mutant, forgive me. So tell me how you've been able to take advantage of that.
I think that's a really good question, Paul, and I would say it is to do with both size and structure. I would say size simply because for Mutant we are a team of 40 across 2 markets. It's just that much easier to change things and pivot the scope overnight. But I think structure does have a part to play as well, because we don't have any shareholders or anything of that sort to go through layers of approval. And because of that, when clients come to us asking for help, we are able to quickly change and adapt the scope really of work to focus on the other pillars of work that we offer as well. And I think a lot of that has got to do with how we're able to just make a quick decision top down. There is one P&L that we're really looking at, so it's not a matter of fighting amongst teams or markets to try to figure out who gets the revenue, who gets the best resource to make this happen. I think for us at Mutant, at the end of the day, we do whatever it takes to help our clients grow and help their businesses grow as well, which is very key. So I would say, I think both size and structure does have a part to play.
Yeah, Madan, you're in a slightly different situation in that size-wise, relative to the market, you're bigger than any of the global firms that you're competing against. So for you, presumably, it's all the advantages is structural, but you've still been able to make a lot of changes very quickly over the last decade, right?
I think the period between the last major crisis in the world and this crisis has been a very interesting period. That was 2008-9 and now 2020. And we have dealt with crisis earlier also. It was the internet meltdown, or the .com meltdown as you would call it, or some local crisis that had a major impact. We have begun to treat crisis as a friend, adversity as a learning opportunity. As Winston Churchill said, never waste a good crisis. We don't waste any good crisis. We leverage it. As a independent I think it's more a matter of who your principal stakeholder is. I'm not getting to the stock market and watching my stock at the NASDAQ or in New York Stock Exchange. My principal stakeholder is my employee, my colleague, my partner. My second stakeholder is my client. And whatever has to be done in their interests, because when I serve their interest, my interest gets served. That clarity and that prioritization, I think, then clears the path for everything else. That is very helpful. I'll give you some examples. Early in the pandemic, in the first week when we went to work from home, I said the single biggest problem in this pandemic will be insecurity of people, whether I will have my job, whether my income will be secure. So in the first week, we announced that there will be 0 job cuts, 0, repeat, through the year. There will be no income loss except for 75% of the people. And if we breach a particular revenue line, well, we will have income reduction of one time only for 25% people. Now, when you create a situation of that kind, you have an army or you have a force which is fully prepared to fight it out and all hands are on the deck, and that impacts client service and it becomes a virtuous chain. And I think we have been able to do that. Or if you take other things, this pandemic is going to change this world forever and it's going to continuously change. The signposts of the future are already there. Can you do mid-flight course corrections as you see the stars? The answer is yes. So we have dumped some practices. We are sure we are going to not indulge in them anymore. And we have started some new, which we are going to build and strengthen even further. That kind of agility that we have as independents is really useful. Or doubling up on L&D investments or hiring, senior hiring in this time. Every fortnight or so, we have announced a senior hire that is going to make us more strategic, that's going to strengthen our new focus areas. So I think these are the advantages of being independent. Size is not really an issue. It is the compulsions that network firms or very large independents who operate in many countries have. So that's what I'll say.
One of the things that I hear whenever I mention the statistics that I gave you earlier about growth to the holding company agencies is that independents have an unfair advantage. I've even had somebody describe it to me as cheating. And that is that you don't have to deliver to a parent company or an owner a certain profit margin every year. And so if you want to, for example, sacrifice profit margins to make investment hires or simply to run the business more smoothly in a year when things are tumultuous like this, you can do that. Whereas an Interpublic, an Omnicom, a WPP agency has somebody looking over their shoulder saying, no, deliver the 10% or the 15%. It used to be 20%, but I don't know anybody who's doing that consistently, to the parent company every year. And Angela, that's not a bug, right? That's a feature. That's a great advantage. And not only that, over the long run, it seems to me to be mistaken in that a lot of independent firms deliver excellent margins.
Yes, and I think it's a choice. So I think for those people, there is always the opportunity, as all probably the rest of us did, is to start our own. So I do see it as being a choice, and I see it as being a feature. That said, I mean, we've got to run a commercial operation because, for all of us, it's our skin in the game. And if we want to continue to grow the business, to try new things, you need the freedom to be able to do those things, and you need the kind of the cash and the stability behind you to make that happen. So, yes, it might not be, the parent company breathing, down your neck, but you do have to make clever choices to enable you to sustain the business and to grow the business. But to them, I say they, like the rest of us, have the opportunity to join Independence Day.
Madan, I get the feeling that your firm enjoys fairly healthy margins most of the time. So I assume you haven't made much of a sacrifice.
No, we haven't. So, I mean, if you take a long-term view, my 20-year CAGR is 22%, my 15-year CAGR is 21%, and my 10-year CAGR is 18%. Now, when you have a CAGR of that kind and you keep doing the right investments and doing the right core corrections, margin is an automatic byproduct. You cannot focus on the margin and then drive the car looking at the meter. You have to keep looking ahead and then drive the car, and the meter takes care of by itself.
Lina, what about you? Has this crisis made any difference to the way you you make sort of financial decisions in particular?
Yeah, I actually agree with Madan and Angela in terms of, we have the opportunity to really be investing, making the right investments, which I think, a lot of networks don't have the freedom of choice. I understand that there's a lot of hiring freezes and all that across the globe. But for us, I think two things that we did that's, I think, quite different, and all thanks to our independence, was one, earlier this year, as soon as we understood the gravity of the global pandemic, instead of just a simple, cost-cutting exercise in terms of payroll, we, as an independent agency, were able to develop a mutant equity program. So we wanted, like Madan said earlier, we wanted to make sure our focus was really on employees, and that we were transparent, honest, and provided them with the right opportunity to also, instead of just taking a blanket 25% pay cut, for us to give them a slice of the company as well. So this was only activated for a 3-month period, and we saw, revenues and cash flows as well bounce back very quickly. So we were a little bit, premature, I guess, in terms of like looking at the severity of the pandemic. But I'm glad also that we made that choice, because till today, even, providing an option for our mutants to buy back, and get the cash back and the pay cut. In fact, a lot of them actually chose to hold on to their shares because they do believe in, the growth opportunities that mutant has. So I think that is one thing, that we did that was quite, I guess, different from other networks, which probably wouldn't have the chance to just, do that.
Yeah, no, it was fascinating to me to see how quickly the holding companies sort of issued edicts that their member agencies or their subsidiaries, however you want to look at it, had to impose a hiring freeze, had to impose a pay freeze, had to take certain actions. At which point you wonder, are the CEOs of the individual agencies really CEOs in any meaningful sense? Or are they in fact just middle managers doing whatever they're told by somebody 5 layers above them? And I think that's one of the values of independence. I have to ask though, do any of you look at the big holding company agencies and see anything that makes you jealous, anything that you'd like to have that you sort of don't have because you're an independent? You mentioned the international connections, Angela, and you found a solution to that.
Yeah. I would say that that consultants coming through do look to have opportunities overseas. So they do look to think, if I stay at this firm, can I work overseas? There's the Australian, I don't know if it's still the pull of all the Australians go to work in London. It seems to be the thing that they do. A bit of a struggle at the moment. So having the PROI worldwide kind of partnership enables us to offer that to our staff. So that would be one thing that when we were starting out as a way to kind of retain staff and give them opportunities, that would be one thing. But can I tell you an anecdote, just to your point about, and an anecdote, I was going to say that needs to stay in the room, but there are probably about 600 people watching. One of the globals sent one of the GMs of one of the offices in Australia a list of the people to let go. So here's your list based on us doing the analysis. And I just thought, so A, you're completely disempowered as a leader, but also B, what are they making those decisions on? Is it the kind of spreadsheet, or is it really, is that the right person for this firm and can they help us to grow? So I just thought that was quite telling, I thought.
What about the other two, Lina? Do you see any disadvantage to being independent?
I guess I would echo what Angela said as well in terms of like the network and the reach. Sometimes that's important. I think the other advantage of a network would be the ability to tap on like different skill sets, because us I would say that for Mutant are very focused on public relations, a bit of digital marketing and branding as well. But I think the power of a network does allow them to look at the talent across the board and kind of like plug and play the best talent that makes sense for that client's business at that point of time. And this could include also a huge pivot in terms of like the scope of work. So I think that's one thing that independents probably would lack.
So I'm going to actually bring an audience question into the mix here because it relates to this topic a little bit. And we have a question here. Not sure it's come to me anonymously, but somebody wanted to know, how hard is it for independent agencies to access capital for acquisitions? Madan, you've been able to expand fairly successfully, and you've made a couple of small acquisitions. So you have a perspective on that, presumably.
There is one fundamental assumption is there that the networks have spent a great amount of money to acquire anything. I think they've bought everything for peanuts, and the entrepreneurs really got a bad deal. I mean, poor guys struggling through the earnout period, working under all the constraints imposed so that there is no growth and there is no margin and there's not enough left to make money out of the earnout. So that's a different point altogether. But I don't think if you have to grow, the model I would like to follow is more organic. But if you have to make acquisition, there's adequate capital available. I mean, there's no dearth of capital if you have the right idea and the right things to do.
What about succession planning? Because you all are first generation entrepreneurs. Right? Your names are either on the door or in Angela's case, in the initials, or you came up with a catchy name yourself. But you're all first generation entrepreneurs. What about exit strategy? Is that something that you worry about? And is the exit strategy almost inevitably that you sell to a big holding company eventually? Is that still the primary escape route?
On a lighter note, Paul, I have told my people that nobody's going to ask me about succession because I'm going to work for a full 100 years. That's 36 more years left.
Arun will be happy to know that I am not.
On a serious note, it is an issue. And I think the independents don't do a great job of succession planning. As a philosophy, Adfactors has decided to remain independent forever. At least till I am around, there's no way we are selling it to anybody. Because we just enjoy the privileges of being there are a couple of things we miss though. I mean, if I was a part of a network, would I get a chance to talk to, let's say, Andy Polinsky someday? He's such a fine mind. Or have a chat with Richard Edelman. There are some very fine minds in the global context. And those conversations we replace with our own partners like Angela or Neil in Australia, or John Leopold or Claire Parsons in London, or Peter Finn. There are many fine people here, so we try and make do with that. But that is one thing. The second thing is, with the access to resources that the large units have, the developments that do on the technology side, for example, somebody develops a crisis simulation tool, I don't have access to it. If I'm part of a global thing, I will have. But I think the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages, and therefore one must continue. On a succession note, I have decided one thing, that someday when I'm too old to run it, or when the guys think I'm unfit to run it, I will hand over the keys to somebody and just walk out.
What about you, Lina? You're obviously very young to be thinking about succession planning, but have you given much thought to sort of what happens when you either want to move on to something else, or somebody comes in and makes a big offer for your firm?
I think, I do have a long way to go, many, many years and decades ahead. I would, kind of echo what Madan said, though. I think for Mutants, for us, our independency is very important as well. And we've had, a couple of approaches, of course, for folks who want to get into our markets. But at the end of the day, I think, once you've had a taste of independence, it's very, very hard to go back. So I think that's one consideration, because at Mutants, our culture is something that is very key for us to attracting and retaining great talent and also great clients. And I think that might, fundamentally change if we were to give up our independence and, go into a bigger network. I think in terms of succession planning, I actually have, a very positive overview in terms of, the talent that we have in Asia and Southeast Asia, specifically for Mutants' case. We do, and I personally am a big believer in attracting the right talent, training them from young, and giving them the opportunities as well to grow rapidly and very quickly, which is another advantage, I think, because in my previous years, I was part of larger network agencies, and it was very hard to really crush that threshold without hurting larger egos and all that in place. So I think, in terms of succession plans, obviously I'm going to be around for a long while, but in the meantime, there is huge opportunities for us to expand in the region, and I am looking at, training the young leaders that I have at Newton. So.
We do have a question here from Ferry de Bakker that I thought was interesting. So I'll toss this one to Angela first, and then see if anybody else wants to chime in. How do panelists feel about Harold Burson's statement that our business is not profitable enough to satisfy both shareholders and managers and staff?
Well, I would completely disagree.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with Harold Burson, right? But yeah. I don't see that at all.
No, I don't see that. No, so I think it can be done, and I think it can be even done, as Madan said, in during tough economic times. So I don't agree. If others, Madan or Lina, have a view.
Yeah, I would like to jump in really quickly, because I was watching Ferry de Bakker's, talk just earlier before ours, and he mentioned a point that really resonated, which is take care of our inside first for the outside to blossom. And we at Mutants, for us, it's a fundamental thing. We do take care of our employees first and foremost. It just makes business sense. We hire the right talent, groom them, give them the right opportunities to shine, and their hearts are in it 100%. And when you have a great team who's truly passionate and motivated, the clients see that, and the work that, and the outcomes that come out as well. It just, it just makes sense. And because of that, our team and employee retention rate and client retention rate is always, I would say, far outshines the larger network agencies. And for us, it makes business sense, because then profit comes, it's a natural thing that occurs, because we take care of our employees and their clients. Just makes sense.
Jim Collins came up with this wonderful sort of framing for issues like this, where he talked about the tyranny of the or versus the genius of the and. And it was like, the question isn't, do I satisfy my shareholders or do I satisfy my managers? It's how do I satisfy my shareholders and my managers? And once you start to think about it like that, you see that there's not a conflict, there's a synergy between those two things. One more quick question before we have to go. Do independent, this is a real softball, I don't know who asked this. Do independent firms have a greater empathy factor and their wiggle room for employees? And how is that asset used?
I mean, you don't have to make a conscious effort to use that when there are people who are happy and inspired and secure. Everything else just comes out of it. So and if I connect it to the previous question, if you take care of your people first, they take care of your clients. And when you take care of your clients, everything, I mean, the shareholders are taken care of. So it's just a value chain. And I think that model has to be followed.
I would agree. I was going to say, Paul, that my team get very tired of hearing me rabbit on about the and, the power of the and, which is something I learned many years ago, but I completely agree. That said, let's be fair, there are fantastic people leaders and kind of managers in the large, in the large firms, in the large global firms. So, yes, I'm sure in independent firms there are people who do it really well and not, and same in the global. So I worked in a global for a brilliant leader in my early years. So I do think that there are fantastic leaders in the independents and non-independents, I think, to be fair.
Yeah, I agree absolutely. But I also think that in a publicly traded environment in particular, you can always use the fiduciary responsibility argument as cover to make non-people friendly decisions. And I would say that I've seen that over the years. We don't have time, I'm afraid, to dive more deeply into that. We've burned through our half an hour very quickly. So I'm going to thank Madan and Angela and Lina for a lively discussion and pass the baton back to Arun.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for getting up so early. Just in case you're not aware, it's very early in London, and leads me to believe that Paul will still be around and involved when he's 100. I would, of course, welcome that. But we're going to move on now to our final session of the day. So if we could please bring in our final lineup of panelists. It's a very topical one. It's entitled, How Are Asia's Global Brands Navigating the New Geopolitics? I think this has been an interesting year for many reasons. And one of the big developments, of course, that we have seen has been the rising tensions that the world is grappling with, whether that involves China, the USA, or India. All of this has real implications for Asian brands who are being forced to walk a tightrope, in some cases, between competing allegiances. So OJ, if we could please add the panelists, thank you very much. Just going to do a very quick intro. We were hoping to run this as more of a freewheeling discussion in the spirit of free markets. I will be the soft pedaling regulator. So first of all, joining us all the way from Brussels, someone who's also got up very early, and many thanks for that. Tata Consultancy Services CMO of Global Markets, Abhinav Kumar. Abhinav, welcome. Good morning.
Thank you, Aaron. And I've got my morning caffeine, so I'm good to go.
Excellent, and good product placement there. We're also very lucky to be joined by Fidelity International Investment Director Catherine Yeung, who I believe is here in Hong Kong. Is that correct, Catherine?
That's correct, Arun. Thanks for having me.
Great, welcome. And rounding out the lineup is Yusuf Hatia, Senior Partner and MD of Client Experience for International Markets at Fleishman Hillard. Okay, so let's get going. I don't want to spend too much time talking about a lot of the issues which I suspect many of our attendees are familiar with. So I want to start with this question, really. And it's a fairly basic one, but I think a lot will follow from it. And it's this: how challenging are today's geopolitics for brands? And particularly in terms of what they've historically had to deal with. And Abhinav, if I could start with you first, please.
Sure, thanks, Aaron. I think it's no surprise to anyone who's attending this forum that it's a very complex time for the field of communications, led by a complex geopolitical situation, right? There are many factors which are driving this. But I would also like to, if you to answer your question just straight up in numbers, if you ask me on a scale of 1 to 10, how complex is it? I'd probably rate it a 7, It's not a 10 on 10. The immediacy of our times make us think this is the most complex time ever. But if you really sit back, reflect, and take a look at history, there have been much more complex times in our history, right? Imagine the situation of the world wars and the kind of choices businesses need to make then, right? If you're an American business and your country is just in the 40s gone to war with Germany, and you have massive operations in Germany. By the way, Coca-Cola had this situation. It's a different degree of complexity you need to deal with as with today. The Cold Wars were a complex time for businesses, etc. Having said that, I think there are 3-4 trends which are really driving change today. There's a lot of intense polarization politically. People are moving away from the center, more to the left and to the right. You're seeing that in every country in the world. There's a lot more climate activism, which is leading to political change. You're seeing the rise of the Green right here in Brussels. The last election last year of the European Parliament saw the Green parties make a big leap up. In Germany, if you look at the polls, if an election was to be held today, the Green Party would be the number 2 party after the ruling CDU-CSU combined, polling about 22% of the popular vote. So that's certainly something which is being factored currently into the thinking. Economic nationalism, I think we'll discuss that in the panel as well. There's growing trade friction driven by economic nationalism. This year, which has been particularly special with the pandemic and the resulting recession, is going to lead to some more frictions on that front. But also, what's driving two other mega trends which are really driving change is an economic shift, and then the shift towards technology. And this year, while we look back at 2020, of course, it will be the year of COVID. But there are also 2 other very important inflection points which have been crossed, which have been crossed without us perhaps realizing it. In terms of the economic shift, this is the year where in purchasing power terms, the GDP of Asia has crossed the 50% mark of worldwide GDP, right? So it marks that shift, economic shift, gone. The majority now of the world economy is based in Asia. The second shift is on technology. I mean, we talk a lot at our business, we talk about enterprise technology, but if you just look at the consumer channels point of view, this is the year where the 50% mark has been breached in terms of today, 3.8 billion people are active on social media. So half of the world's population is now active on social media. 70% have smartphones, 60% have internet, but 50% of them now are active on social. So it's driving, I think, a lot of change in politics and consequently for us as communicators.
Thanks, Abhinav. Catherine, over to you. How do you see it from the investment perspective?
Yeah, it's really interesting because whilst geopolitical risks are definitely there and they have to be part of your investment thesis, your expectations for risk return, whether it's on a market or a sector or an individual company, a fascinating trend that we have seen, and it relates to Abhinav's point about the growing wealth, the economic wealth that we're seeing in emerging markets in Asia and in particular China. So even a few years ago, so I'm talking 2017, you were seeing the rise of local Chinese brands. So a survey was done, and out of the top 50 brands, there was something like 18 brands, Alipay, WeChat, in terms of the best known brands. Now, 1 year later, so at the end of 2018, so this is really before all the rising tension trade-wise between the US and China, you saw 30 of the top brands in the top 50. And these were Chinese brands competing against French brands, German brands, American brands, etc., across a number of sectors. And the participants really said the rise over such a short period of time, and that number's probably only have increased today, is really Chinese companies understanding their consumer base. And again, as Abhinav pointed out, it's also being technologically driven. The Chinese companies have got a huge focus on innovation, and the pace of innovation in a place like China, it's just staggering. You only have to look at data points, whether it's, for example, R&D, AI, and this is really driving these companies. And again, they are increasing their market share and their brand awareness versus foreign brands.
Yeah, and we will come back to that later on in the discussion because, it's clear that there will be opportunity from all of these issues we're discussing as well. Yusuf, over to you. From your perspective, advising brands, has this risen to become a particular challenge this year?
Oh, absolutely, and I think the points that we just heard as well are absolutely valid. I mean, geopolitically, I think everyone is trying to get to grips with exactly what does this mean? What does it mean for companies? I think as communicators, we're under a different kind of pressure. We're now expected, even required, to understand this very complex and fluid geopolitical environment that our clients operate in. I've spent a decade working in the UK, around about the same time in India, and a little bit of time in the Middle East. But more importantly, I'm on the phone and in meetings with my colleagues and clients all around the world every single day. I speak to reporters, analysts, economists from around the world. And I think as communicators, that gives us a very interesting global political perspective that our clients require from us as well. So to me, that's the really interesting challenge. And I think it's also an opportunity.
Sure. Okay, so that kind of frames the some of the issues in play. Now let me ask, let's discuss this next question. Traditionally, when faced with these kinds of challenges, the playbook would tell a company to remain neutral, remain silent, especially multinational companies who typically try to be, let's say, charitably try to be all things to all people in all markets. Although let's leave aside the concept of hegemony from a particular country. But is staying neutral an option now? Is staying silent an option now? So Yusuf, let me come to you first, if you want to answer that first from your perspective, advising brands, and then Abhinav and Catherine, feel free to jump in after Yusuf has finished.
Yeah, I think trying to stay neutral is kind of our instinct. A lot of the clients we work for want to stay out of the geopolitical sort of environment as well. We've worked for clients in India, and I remember speaking to the chairman of a very large conglomerate, and for years, for decades, his approach was we stay apolitical and we stay out of global issues because we have to operate in India and we have operations around the world. Now, I think that still holds true. What these companies are not saying is, I need to back a political party or a politician. However, employees, other stakeholders, customers, consumers, they now require companies, if not to take a stand, at least to have a point of view, at least to express where they stand on certain things. So you can remain neutral to a degree. What you can't do is stay invisible and away from what's going on in the broader context.
So if I may chime in there, Arun, I think I echo exactly what Yusuf says, right? And you know, as the old anecdote goes, when there was a CEO who was asked, saying, "Are you political?" And she said intensely, said, "Is your business political?" She's like, "Yes, we are very ideological." So he said, "So what's your ideology? Do you support the left, the center, or the right?" And the answer was, "Well, we intensely support whoever is the ruling party at that time," right? So I think echoing what Yusuf said, businesses, particularly multinational corporations, need to walk that path of political neutrality, right? If you have operations across the world, you're operating in different political systems. Even if you're operating in democratic countries, you may have a different political leaning and power in each country you operate in. A third of the world is still under authoritarian rule, right? If you are operating in those markets, you need to recognize the reality of that and then make your own calculations on whether there is a path for you to operate there, or whether your ethics and your own of your cooperation and your stakeholders allow you to operate there. But I think what I'd say is it's important for businesses to remain politically neutral, but that does not in any way mean that they should hesitate, particularly in today's age, to take a stance on societal issues, right, which may be arising from those politics, whatever it is. It's equality, it's inclusion, it's climate. There is a growing expectation on businesses and on CEOs to also be activists on these issues. The other caveat I'd say is, while it's important to be politically neutral, that also doesn't mean you don't engage with governments. Neutrality is public neutrality. But behind the scenes, it's important for businesses to engage with governments and be a force for change where required.
And Arun, just on a slightly different angle. So what we are seeing, and I'm just going to relate to the consumer brands because they're quite easy to understand. But if we take the scenario that China, the government, is opening up, in particular their capital markets, but in general their markets, to foreign entities so that multinationals can tap into that huge wealth and the rising incomes and urbanization, everything we're seeing in China in terms of those structural drivers. What we are now seeing is many Chinese brands, and I alluded to it earlier about gaining market share and recognition and brand power, but what they're doing is they're not just copying the international brands anymore. They're creating brands, identifying and adapting to their home market. So take, for example, sports apparel. So in terms of structural drivers, you're seeing more and more of the Chinese population undertaking sporting activities and wearing activewear. And about 40% of the market is basically owned by Adidas and Nike. But what we've seen over the past few years, and from an investment perspective, it was a great special situations that came true. We saw Li Ning really launch this new brand called China Li Ning. And I don't know whether you guys are familiar with it, but essentially what they did was they modernized what Li Ning, the gymnast, the chairman of the company, what he wore in the 80s during the LA Games, and it became this really trendy streetwear, and they showcased it on the catwalks of London and in New York. So it was written up in Vogue magazine, and the pricing point was a lot higher than mainstream Li Ning. And so not only were their margins improving, but they saw overwhelming sales, and that really was a special situation in terms of what underpinned Li Ning coming back into favor with investors. So it's that national pride in terms of brands that a lot of companies are now honing in on.
So that's a really interesting point. So Li Ning's nationality played a critical role in brand preference. And that's an interesting area, I think, to discuss. And we are seeing, for example, some companies facing some challenges in that regard. So HSBC is a really good example, right? Where it feels like it's being pulled in various different directions because of its origins and its heritage and its so-called nationality. Abhinav, if I can come back to you now. I mean, TCS, obviously, Tata, homegrown Indian hero, but you're present you have tens of thousands of employees in every corner of the world. Is it a question of being viewed as an Indian company, or do you not have a choice in that anymore?
Yeah, I think so. Arun, I think one of the trends which Catherine was pointing to, right, is indeed the rise of Chinese brands. That's a fact, right? Even in Brand Finance's top 100 brands, if you look at it, after the US brands, China's firmly number 2. There's 70 of them on the list, and it's been, if you looked at it just 10 years ago, and you walk out to someone on the street and say, "Can you name a Chinese company?" Most would have blanked out anywhere in the world, or maybe named someone like Huawei, who were active. If you ask the same question today, there are probably 10 or 12 names most people can reel off, right? So that's certainly a growing trend. The other growing trend on the brand side is what you just referred to, is the rise of geographic branding, as it's called in the field, which means how important is your point of origin of your enterprise, or where it's perceived to be by consumers to your overall brand, right? And I think when companies look at it, it's going to be a conscious choice they need to make in today's geopolitical environment, right? They are companies who make the choice, as Catherine was saying, to wrap yourself up in the flag, portray that national pride, and that benefits them based on their business calculations. But they're also very globalized companies for whom they need to manage that balance and that tightrope of operating in different markets, right? And therefore being recognized as too closely to a single nation or their nation of origin, particularly if their nation of origin is in conflict areas with other major economies in the world, will be a challenge, right? And I think that's one of the challenges which this profession will need to increasingly deal with in the coming years. Even more so for companies, you mentioned HSBC, even more so for companies who actually got that geographic brand built into their name, right? British Airways, HSBC, Deutsche Bank, naturally just having the country name built into your name makes it part of your brand, right? So that, I think that's also going to be part of your choices to rebrand or not.
Yeah, Arun, I think what's really interesting as well is it's kind of a double-edged sword for a lot of brands. On the one hand, there's the convenience of playing to the home crowd, the domestic market, the consumers, and especially if you're in a market like India or China, you have a huge consumer base to work with as well. So it is incredibly convenient at a particular point in time to look inward and embrace the flag, as Abhinav says as well. The flip side of that is this new nationalism. And you then suddenly get sucked into the vortex of the geopolitical issues and wake up to a situation that a company like TikTok is facing now. And how do you manage that? How far do you go? How do you message and how do you build those narratives so that they walk that very delicate tightrope and not fall one side or the other?
Yeah, if I might, just a very quick point there as well is it's also, there's a sectoral association with it, right? If you look at our business, TCS as a global technology company, there are places where we've really benefited from a perception of us as a company coming in from India, right? Because for two reasons, India is at the heart of skills and the technology industry in particular. So having a point of origin there is seen as something which strengthens your hand in a competitive situation. At the other point as well, India geopolitically has, for most of its history, been a non-aligned country, right? And has had harmonious relations with most of the world. Some frictions in the immediate neighborhood, but mostly with most of the world, it has a harm, and that has not really, affected things at all. So it's been a benefit, but at the same time, I think, as you said, Arun, we are a very global company. We operate in 46 countries. We have 450,000 employees, growing employee base in the US, in Europe, Latin America, which I had the privilege to lead previously. In the Asia Pacific region as well, we've expanded very, very significantly, whether it's in Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, we have a huge presence. So we are, a global company, and that it is that balance of which you need to walk and make very conscious choices about.
And Arun, from an investment perspective, a huge trend we've been seeing over the past couple of years, but 2020 is really a standout, is that we're seeing a lot of Chinese companies, and you could take Alibaba, is it a domestic company? Is it becoming a global company? But they now have a secondary listing in Hong Kong. So they're listed in the US, and they set the trend at the end of last year, whereby now you've seen JD.com, NetEase. So a lot of Chinese companies that were previously listed in New York now having a dual listing. And of course, we're now seeing an even bigger trend in terms of we're seeing first issuance. So IPOs, companies coming to market, they're based here. So again, Ant Financial, which is expected to be a mega blockbuster IPO, they've announced that they're listing in both Hong Kong as well as the Star Bourse, which is the equivalent of NASDAQ in China, only been around, by the way, for about a year, and already close to 200 companies have either listed or in the process of listing. So I think the investment community and the demand and liquidity is actually now in Asia for these IPOs to actually be very successful, and for the flow of money in stocks to be in China, Hong Kong, India, across Asia. So again, versus, I say, 1997 and the Asian currency crisis, you're not seeing that, we call it flight to capital, a flight to quality, beg your pardon, where flows leave perceived risky assets such as Asian equity and go back to whether it's bonds or US equities. You're not seeing this time around because it's a domestic investor base, take the Chinese stock market, for example, that's really been underpinning the demand of the market, not just foreign investors. And I think that trend is going to become even more and more important in the years ahead of us.
And just staying with you, Catherine, I'm curious because we've heard a lot about China's financial services market and how this is a huge opportunity potentially for international financial services companies, whether they're from the US or elsewhere. But do the current issues in terms of geopolitics change that equation at all? Do you see potentially a backlash against, for example, a US financial services company looking to benefit from the opening up of that sector in China?
You know, again, because of the COVID situation, it's really been in the background or in the shadows in terms of the Chinese government announced many reforms in terms of opening up the capital market at the start of the year. It started with the insurance sector, then we've seen some changes from a derivatives trading perspective. Asset management companies can now apply for a Chinese license to do business there. Changes to investment banking rules and restrictions. So you are definitely seeing that trend in the right direction. But I would say the biggest concern for foreign investors or clients of ours is still this concern about, you know, we just feel that the numbers aren't transparent, whether it's corporate numbers or whether it's government data, and especially around this corporate governance and ESG theme. Yes, you could argue that the disclosure for many Chinese companies is lower than overseas companies, and hence that's why they tend to get lower ESG ratings. But in fact, if you had to say which market has seen the most dramatic improvement over the past 1 year, 2 years, we'd actually argue it's China. And one of the reasons being is that the regulator changed their corporate governance code back in September 2018. So for example, all listed companies have to have a dividend policy. And in most aspects, and financial services is key. Look at the Chinese banks. We're still paying out attractive dividends despite the economic environment we find ourselves in, really bucking the trend to a lot of global banks or a lot of global companies who used to pay out very attractive dividends, and now those dividends are suspended. So this focus on rewarding minority shareholders becoming more and more apparent in China. It's quite contrarian because people just go, I want to own China for growth. But in fact, this income aspect is probably going to gain more and more traction, as I said. And finally, when it comes to corporate governance, you know, as an asset manager, you know, our clients' views and goals are aligned to that of society. So for clients like ours, you know, it's imperative that we have the corporate engagement and the conversations with management teams to ensure that whether it's corporate governance, social responsibility, environmental issues are at the forefront, and we take it very seriously on all our investment decisions.
Arun,
can I come to you? Yeah,
sure. Just to add that, I mean, just echoing what Catherine said as well. I mean, you know, 10 years ago, or actually 12 years ago, when I came to India, a lot of the clients we were working with would talk about the opportunity of India around the context of the growing middle class or the opportunities at the bottom of the pyramid. That point of view has matured. I think companies now look at markets like India and China in a different way. And that maturity has come about because they're looking at it from a longer term point of view as well. So, you know, we work with a very large pension fund, and the CEO, when he talks about India, says that their investment criteria is over decades, not quarters. They're not looking at these markets for short-term immediate growth. They're looking at the portfolio over decades. And that's why I think the investment is flowing into infrastructure, innovation, technology, as much as it was into some of the consumer opportunities in those, you know, in a decade gone as well.
Yusuf, just staying on India for a moment, what is your advice for Chinese companies in India now, you know, a country where Chinese smartphone brands are the most popular, whether that's Oppo or Vivo, and yet, you know, so many apps are now banned, and there does seem to be a certain amount of anti-China sentiment, you know, amongst the public at large.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think, in being completely honest, I mean, it is a very delicate environment that we're seeing in India at the moment. And you rightly point out that there is consumer sentiment wrapped up in this sort of nationalism as well. But having said that, when you look at some of the brands that operate in India that are of Chinese origin, I think they've done incredibly well to stay away from those discussions and at the same time talk about their Indianness. I mean, it's quite interesting to see a brand like Xiaomi that actually is kind of very rooted in its Indianness, even though it's a Chinese origin company. So I think they have understood those dynamics. I don't think that they are oblivious to the fact that consumer sentiment has changed. It is still evolving, and there are, potential clouds on the horizon as well. But at the same time, they are investing in India, they're creating jobs in India, and many of these brands are here for the long run. And I think over the course, again, over years and decades, things should even out.
So is it just a question of keeping your head down for a while? I mean, it's just a...
I think it's more about being authentic and true to your real plans for a market like India. If you're looking at it for short-term growth, then the only opportunity you have is keep your head down, ride the storm, and probably come out at the other end. If you're looking at it as a proper investment, and TCS is an example in other parts of the world, in it for the long run, making significant investments in the countries that they operate and not seeing it as a short-term opportunity, then I think over the course of that period, you get the benefits as well.
Abhinav, last comment for you.
Yeah, just a quick one. I think just echoing what Yusuf says, and I think he makes an important point. We were talking about the geographic brand and the sort of amorphousness of multinationals as national brands, right? But I think, as always, for any global multinational which is seen as a vanilla global company, that's not what they want. The next stage in their development for every company is to be seen as a national brand in each country which they operate in. And some of them have done it very well. On the topic of India, if you are to go to in the streets of India and talk about Unilever, for example, right? Or Hindustan Lever as it was traditionally known, people would fight with you if you tell them it's an Anglo-Dutch company. They'll say, no, it's an Indian company. What the hell are you talking about, right? So I think that's vitally important also in this discussion, that yes, that long-term thinking is important. Being part of the community and its issues is important. And localizing your company, your brand to each region you operate in is going to be vital in the times ahead.
Okay. Well,
it may lead to also complex situations. It may lead to complex situations, and that's where I think governance is really important of your communications and your public affairs, because you might find a local unit of your company is representing issues in a certain way based on the demands of that market, but that's inconsistent with market X versus market Y, right? So that's where I think governance is really, really important and delicate.
Marican, can I just add one final point before I imagine
you may,
wrap up?
please do.
I suspect I'm echoing Yusuf's and Abhinav's thoughts here, but we'd argue that the biggest trend we've seen over the past decade, and this relates to China, but you could also argue Asia as a region, but China really growing its influence on both the economic as well as the political global stage. And we really do think that the biggest shift over the next 10 years to come is China, and again Asia, increasing its weighting in global indices and benchmarks. And as such, you're going to see both Chinese and Asian assets really deserve a place in an investment portfolio.
Yeah, actually a very, very helpful point on which to end this discussion. Unfortunately,
Arun, before you end it, one comment, I think, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I think we've gone through a discussion on geopolitics, great points, everything. But very interesting, we've gone through half an hour of a discussion on geopolitics without even mentioning the United States or Europe.
I know. Well, we're in Asia, so it's.
I know it is the APAC forum.
Yeah, maybe it's a relief. Who knows? Thank you all. We could keep talking about this all day, I feel. It's such a rich topic, and as I think many of you will have seen from this discussion now, it's rich in complexity, posing challenges for corporates and brands, but also opportunities as well. So first of all, let me thank our panelists, Catherine, Abhinav, and Yusuf. Thank you all so much for taking part in this session. And all that's left for me to do now is to close our 2020 virtual Asia Pacific Communications Summit. A huge thank you to all of you for participating in today's event. I hope you found it thought-provoking and helpful as we try to navigate the next normal. A big thank you to our sponsors. Of course, they've been wonderful in helping us put together the sessions. They have brought, in particular, I think, a really refreshing willingness to challenge the status quo, which I think reflects this kind of overarching theme of business reset that we've seen through all of the sessions today, from growth to creativity to employment engagement to agency models, and of course, to geopolitics. A huge thank you to SparkUp, to Christopher Domitor for helping make the first 3 sessions so interactive and lively. The SparkUp is still open. You can still take part in exercises, and you can still see the results from various exercises as well. So please feel free. Thank you to the Asia Pacific Association of Communication Directors, our partners at APAC-D, who've helped us put together the agenda, supplied many of the speakers today. Please do, if you're an in-house comms member, join and help us shape the in-house communications profession at apacd.com. Huge thank you to our PRovoke events team, who are working overnight, many of them from London, New York, Berlin. We also have people in Hong Kong and Japan. Hopefully next year this will be in person and it will be in Tokyo. I'm very hopeful. For those of you with a Sabre ticket, we will be back at 5 p.m. Hong Kong time for the Sabre Awards Asia Pacific ceremony. Please join us then. Thank you all.
Ladies and gentlemen,